Welcome, welcome. You're here at Bald Voldemort. Today we present to you, what if Harry was the son of Hades and every killing curse only healed him? Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1. The boy the curse forgot the cupboard under the stairs had a particular smell. Harry had never been able to describe it properly. Damp wood and old shoes and something else beneath that. Something deeper, like soil after rain, like the breath of a place that had never seen sunlight. Most children would have found it suffocating. Harry found it comfortable. He'd spent enough nights awake in the dark to know the dark was not the thing to be afraid of. It was the living you had to watch. He was 10 years old the first time a dead person talked to him. Not a ghost, nothing dramatic, no chains or moaning. Just old Mrs. Figg's husband, who died in 1987 and apparently hadn't quite gotten around to leaving. Harry had been sitting on the garden wall outside number 4, eating a piece of bread he'd managed to smuggle from the kitchen, when the old man simply appeared beside him and said in a perfectly conversational tone that the hydrangeas needed more water. Harry had stared at him. The old man had shrugged, said Arabella never did listen, and faded. Harry had watered the hydrangeas. He'd never told anyone. There was no one to tell. The Dursleys had made that abundantly clear in roughly 10,000 different ways over 10 years. And the children at school had been frightened of him since the incident in year 3, when he'd accidentally turned the classroom hamster temporarily transparent. He didn't mean to do these things. They simply happened around him, the way weather happens, the way gravity happens, naturally, without apology, and usually at inconvenient moments. The night before his 11th birthday, Harry lay in his cupboard and listened to the house breathe. Dudley was snoring 3 rooms away. Vernon was the same. Petunia slept silently, which Harry had always found slightly unnerving. He stared at the ceiling of his cupboard, which was low enough that if he pressed his palm flat against the wood he could feel the vibration of Dudley's television through the joists. Dudley had fallen asleep with it on again. Some American action film, all gunshots and car chases, filtered down through the floorboards. Harry wasn't thinking about television. He was thinking about the letters. 12 of them now. Maybe more. Vernon had been burning them faster than Harry could count. Face gone the color of an overripe plum each time the post arrived. Voice doing that particular strangled thing it did when he was genuinely frightened, but trying to perform fury instead. Harry recognized the performance. He'd had years to study it. Vernon Dursley was afraid of a lot of things, and he dealt with all of them by getting very loud and very red and occupying as much physical space as possible, the way some animals made themselves large to scare off predators. The letters were for Harry. He'd seen his name on one before Vernon snatched it away. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs. He'd read that address and felt something move in his chest. Not hurt, exactly, though there was some of that. Something more like recognition. Someone knew where he actually slept. He was still thinking about it when he drifted off. He dreamed, as he often did, of a dark place that didn't feel dark. More like a room where all the light was simply a different color, cool and silver and old, like moonlight through deep water. There was a dog in the dream, enormous, with 3 heads, and all 3 of them were watching Harry with an expression that managed somehow to convey both wariness and profound respect. Harry reached out and scratched the middle head behind the ear. The dog made a sound like distant thunder and leaned into his hand. He woke up to someone knocking down the front door. Not knocking, the kind that left structural damage. Harry sat up and cracked his head on the ceiling of the cupboard and pressed his ear to the wood and heard Vernon bellow something incoherent, heard the crash of something large against the door. And then the door was simply open, a wall of cold night air pouring into the hall, and into that wall of cold air stepped the largest human being Harry had ever seen or imagined. Harry opened the cupboard door an inch. The man was enormous. That was the only word. He had to angle himself sideways to get through the doorframe, and even then one shoulder caught the frame and bits of plaster rained down onto the welcome mat. He had a beard that started at his cheekbones, and a coat that looked like it was made from the skin of several large animals. And he was carrying a lantern the size of a milk jug, and looking around the Dursley hallway with the expression of a man who had seen considerably worse, but wasn't particularly impressed. "Couldn't have just sent another letter, I suppose," Vernon was saying, in a voice that wanted to be authoritative and kept failing. Petunia had gone the color of old cheese and had flattened herself against the kitchen doorway. Dudley was on the stairs in his pajamas, staring with his mouth open, which was not unusual for Dudley, but the cause was. "Letter," the giant man said, with a sort of enormous patient contempt. "I've been sendin' letters. Ye have been burnin' 'em. Bit rude, that." He looked around the hall, then down, and his lantern swung toward the cupboard door, and his eyes, dark, sharp, surprisingly perceptive in a face made mostly of beard, met Harry's through the gap. "There he is!" Harry opened the cupboard door fully and stepped out. He was small for his age. The Dursleys had seen to that, mostly through neglect rather than intent, in the same way you could stunt a plant's growth by simply never watering it, and he was wearing Dudley's old pajamas, which were 4 sizes too large, and his hair was doing its usual impression of a small, determined explosion. His glasses had one arm held on with tape. He looked, in short, exactly like what he was, a child who nobody had been taking proper care of. The giant man looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his expression, not quite sadness, not quite wonder, something older and stranger than either. "Blimey," he said softly. "Ye look just like—" He stopped, reconsidered. "Ye look like your mum, round the eyes." "Who are you?" Harry asked. "Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys at Hogwarts." He reached inside his coat. The coat appeared to have a pocket system that operated by its own spatial logic and produced a slightly squashed birthday cake with "Happy Birthday Harry" written on it in green icing. "Also, I got ye a cake." Harry looked at the cake. He looked at Hagrid. Behind him, Vernon had found his voice again and was using it at some volume, but Harry found, with the particular quality of attention that had developed over 10 years of tuning out Vernon's noise, that he could simply not hear it. "I'm a wizard," Harry said. It wasn't a question. He'd known something, some quality of the word wizard for years, the same way you sometimes know a word in a language you've never been taught. Hagrid blinked, then smiled, enormous and warm like a hearth fire scaled up to architectural proportions. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, are." Vernon was still talking. Harry picked up the birthday cake, found it was chocolate, and took a bite. The night was young. They slept in a hut on a rock in the middle of the sea, which was one of Vernon's less successful ideas. The idea being, apparently, that letters could not reach a place with no address. Harry had woken up at midnight to his birthday technically beginning, and had sat in the dark of the hut listening to the storm outside and the dead. There were fishermen down there, under the water, from the fishing boat that had gone down in the storm of 1953, and they were not unhappy. Harry got a sense, from the dead, not of words but of feelings. The way you get a sense of the general emotional content of a room when you walk in, they were simply still. Waiting, the way water waits. Going nowhere in particular and finding it restful. Harry found it restful too. Now it was morning, gray and cold and tasting of salt, and Hagrid was on the ferry to the mainland telling Harry about Hogwarts with a warmth and enthusiasm that felt like being hit slowly by a very affectionate tidal wave. He talked about Quidditch. Harry stored that away, and about houses, and about a man named Albus Dumbledore, whom Hagrid clearly regarded with something adjacent to religious awe. "What happened to my parents?" Harry asked, somewhere in the middle of a stretch about the Hogwarts greenhouses. Hagrid went quiet. He looked at Harry with that same older, stranger expression from last night. You know who." He stopped. Tried again. "There was this dark wizard, right? Most powerful one in, well, long time anyway. And he came to your house when you were 1 year old, and he killed your mum and dad, Harry. But then he tried to kill you, and he couldn't. The curse bounced back, destroyed him near enough. Nobody knows why. You're famous for it." Harry thought about this for a while. The ferry churned through gray-green water. A gull screamed past the window. The curse bounced back, Harry repeated. That's what they reckon, yeah. Harry turned this over in his mind. It didn't feel quite right, not like a lie, more like a description that was accurate in its facts and wrong in its understanding, like describing a fire as a light source. Technically true, missing the point entirely. Right, Harry said and left it there and let Hagrid go back to talking about Hogwarts. Diagon Alley arrived like a held breath releasing. Harry stepped through the leaky cauldron and into the courtyard and watched Hagrid tap the bricks in a particular pattern, and then the wall folded back like a curtain, and beyond it was a street that shouldn't exist. The sensory experience of Diagon Alley was considerable. The noise, the smell of 100 magical shops, the sheer density of the impossible. But Harry's attention was not on the shops. It was on the people, more specifically, on how they looked at him. Once Hagrid had said his name to the barman at the leaky cauldron, Tom, an ancient man who seemed held together mostly by apron strings and habit, the reaction had been immediate and uncomfortable. People touching his hand. Tears. A woman in emerald robes who kept saying the scar. Look at the scar in a voice vibrating with a reverence that made Harry feel faintly like an exhibit. He understood, academically, that he was famous. What he hadn't expected was how hollow it would feel, being famous for surviving something you didn't remember, at an age when you were too small to have done anything deliberately. He'd been a baby. The baby hadn't done anything, and yet here were fully grown adults crying at the sight of him. Is it always like this? He asked Hagrid quietly, while a man in a pointed hat was attempting to shake his hand. Bit, yeah, Hagrid said, looking faintly guilty. Yale'll get used to it. Harry doubted that, but he followed along because there were more important things to think about, like Gringotts. The bank was white marble and staffed by creatures who were very decidedly not human, goblins, Hagrid said, short and clever and not to be crossed, and as Harry walked through the doors he felt it. A shift, the same shift he felt in the Dursleys' garden at night when the dead were nearby, that cool silver-dark quality of a place close to something old. Gringotts was very, very old. The gold and the stone and the vaults below were old in a way that had nothing to do with human time. The goblin at the nearest desk stopped mid-sentence with the customer he was serving. He looked at Harry. Every goblin on the floor looked at Harry. It wasn't the reaction of people looking at a celebrity. It was something more fundamental. The reaction of people looking at something they recognized from a category they had not expected to encounter. The head goblin, a particularly ancient specimen named Griffook, stared at Harry for 3 full seconds with an expression of absolute unreadable assessment, then inclined his head in something that was not a bow and not quite anything else, more like one territorial sovereign acknowledging another. Mr. Potter, Griffook said, with a care he hadn't used on any preceding customer. We have been expecting you. Hagrid was telling Griffook about the Philosopher's Stone, about the vault, doing a theatrical display of confidence that convinced nobody in the room. Harry wasn't paying attention to that. He was paying attention to the way the other goblins had gone back to their work with a very specific quality of deliberate casualness, the kind that meant they were watching every move but didn't want him to know it. He knew it anyway. He'd been watched his whole life. He had a feel for it. In the lift, going down, Hagrid went slightly green at the speed. Harry leaned forward and watched the earth close around them, the torchlight flickering on the rough stone walls of tunnels that went deeper than the building above could possibly account for, and he felt the cool silver-dark press closer with every level they dropped. And somewhere far below, very far, a depth that wasn't on any architectural plan and probably wasn't in any country. Something enormous and old and aware acknowledged his presence. Harry pressed his palm flat against the lift wall, the same way he'd pressed it against the joists in his cupboard ceiling. He felt, quite clearly, hello. He said very quietly so Hagrid wouldn't hear. Hello! The lift slowed. Hagrid beamed and said they were at Harry's vault. They were. Harry looked at the gold, enormous quantities of it, glittering in the torchlight, more wealth than the Dursleys could conceive, and felt very little about it beyond a vague sense that it would be useful. He took what seemed like a reasonable amount. He thought about the thing below, the enormous, old, aware thing, and thought about asking Hagrid about it, and decided that some questions wanted better timing. He spent the rest of the morning buying things. School books, robes, a cauldron, ingredients for potions he couldn't yet make. He stood in Madame Malkin's getting measured, and met a pale boy with a pointed face who said things about blood status and muggle-borns with the easy, unconsidered cruelty of someone who had never been challenged on those views. Harry listened to him with the mild, attentive patience of someone performing a mental calculation. "What's your name?" Harry asked when the boy paused. The boy blinked. He'd been expecting either agreement or challenge, not a question. "Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." "Harry Potter." Draco Malfoy's face cycled through several expressions very quickly. He landed on something that wanted to be contempt, but kept slipping into something more complicated. "I know who you are," Draco said. "Then you know I didn't choose my blood any more than you chose yours," Harry said pleasantly. "Something to think about." He turned back to the fitter and said he thought the robes were a bit long at the cuff. Draco Malfoy stared at the back of his head for the rest of the fitting. The wand shop arrived last. Ollivander's was a narrow place stacked to the ceiling with boxes, smelling of sawdust and something beneath that, an old wooden lightning smell that was uniquely its own. Ollivander himself was thin and white-haired with eyes like polished silver coins, and he moved through his shop with the disjointed grace of a man whose attention was always partly somewhere else. He looked at Harry the same way the goblins had, that specific flicker. "Ah," he said, "Mr. Potter, I wondered when I'd be seeing you." The process was theatrical and involved trying 11 wands, each of which either did nothing or did something actively undesirable, including setting fire to a stack of boxes in the corner. Harry tried each one patiently and set each one down when it didn't work and waited. He wasn't particularly worried. The wands would work or they wouldn't. Ollivander disappeared into the stacks and came back with a box that was slightly different from the others, a bit dustier, a bit older, set apart on a shelf like something that had been waiting rather than merely stored. He opened it with a quality of attention that was somewhere between reverence and apprehension. "Holly and phoenix feather," Ollivander said, offering the wand. 11 inches. Curious, very curious, the phoenix whose feather is in this wand gave another feather. Just one other. "It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar." Harry picked up the wand. The green gold light was warm and immediate and smelled like soil after rain. It ran up his arm and down his spine and pooled somewhere behind his sternum in a way that felt not like discovery but like homecoming. The wand didn't care about his name or his scar or his dead parents or his cupboard. It was simply his. The connection was that clean. Ollivander was looking at him with those silver coin eyes. "Curious," the old man said softly. "Very curious indeed. Voldemort used the killing curse on you when you were barely a year old, and something remarkable happened. I wonder." He caught himself, pulled back from whatever he'd been about to say. "I'm sure you'll do great things, Mr. Potter." "I'm sure I'll do something," Harry said, which wasn't quite agreement, and paid for the wand. The train left from King's Cross, platform 9 3/4, which was accessed through a barrier between platforms 9 and 10 in a manner that continued the general Diagon Alley tradition of the magical world, hiding in plain sight behind architecture. Harry ran at the barrier at a pace that was slightly more confident than the situation probably warranted, given he'd never done this before. But the barrier dissolved around him like smoke, and on the other side was the Hogwarts Express, brilliant scarlet and gold, steaming in a manner more dramatic than any modern engine had a right to manage. He found a compartment, loaded his trunk and his owl, Hedwig from Aeolus, white and deeply dignified, and sat down and looked out the window at the platform filling with families. Mothers straightening robes, fathers carrying trunks, siblings arguing and laughing. He watched this with the particular quality of detachment that came from never having had it, which was different from envy. It wasn't painful, exactly, more like looking at a color you'd only ever seen in photographs. The compartment door slid open, and a boy with red hair and freckles and an expression of hopeful determination looked in. "Is it all right if I sit in here? Everywhere else is full." Harry looked at the rest of the train, which was quite clearly not full, and appreciated the opening gambit. "Sure," he said. The red-headed boy's name was Ron Weasley, and he was the youngest of 6 brothers, and he had a rat named Scabbers who looked deeply unwell and was apparently still alive only through stubbornness or dark magic. And he had the quality Harry had noticed in very few people his age, the quality of saying what he actually meant without calculating whether it was the socially optimal thing to say. When he thought something, he said it. When he was embarrassed, he went red to the ears and kept going. When he found out he was sitting with Harry Potter, he was briefly flustered, and then, impressively, got over it and went back to being himself. Harry liked him immediately. "So it's real then," Ron said, indicating the scar with a look that managed to be curious without being intrusive. "That you survived, the killing curse. Apparently. Mental. The killing curse doesn't, it's not supposed to, nothing stops it. That's the whole point of it." "So I've been told," Harry said. He offered Ron one of the chocolate frogs he'd bought from the trolley. Ron took it with the immediate gratitude of someone who'd had a packed lunch that was not quite enough. "Does it hurt?" Ron asked, around a mouthful of chocolate. "The scar? Sometimes, not really." Harry thought about it. "Mostly it just itches like a healing cut." Ron looked at him. "A healing cut," he repeated. "From the death curse." "From whatever it was," Harry said. The compartment door opened again, and this time it was a girl with large brown eyes and an already impressive quantity of dark hair, wearing her new robes with the serious purposefulness of someone who had prepared extensively for this exact moment. She was followed by a round-faced boy with the expression of someone who had already lost something important today. "Has anyone seen a toad?" The round-faced boy, Neville, it turned out, asked with the tone of a person for whom this was a familiar and unenjoyable experience. "We haven't," Harry said, "but I can look." He didn't know how he knew. It was the same way he knew the dead fishermen were under the water, the same way he'd known where old Mr. Fig was standing in the garden, a kind of spatial awareness that extended beyond his eyes, a feel for where living things were. He reached out with it now, absently, like someone trailing their hand in water from the side of a boat, and felt the toad 2 carriages forward, wedged under a seat. "He's in carriage 4 under the second seat from the door," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. "How do you," the girl who had introduced herself as Hermione Granger began. "I'm not sure," Harry said, which was honest. "But I am sure, if that makes sense." It apparently did not make much sense, but it was accurate, because they went to carriage 4, and the toad was exactly where Harry had said it was. Neville retrieved it with the exhausted relief of someone who had done this before. Hermione looked at Harry with an expression he would come to recognize very well over the coming months, the expression of someone encountering a data point that didn't fit any of her existing categories, and finding this simultaneously maddening and fascinating. "That wasn't any standard detection spell," she said. "I've read the standard book of spells, and that wasn't in it." "I know," Harry said. "So what was it?" "I don't know," Harry said pleasantly. "Want some chocolate?" Hermione looked at him for a long moment, then took the chocolate, because it was clearly going to be that kind of year. The castle arrived through rain and darkness, and arrived, specifically, in boats, small ones, 4 to a boat, crossing a black lake that Harry looked into and felt again, that cool silver-dark quality like standing at the edge of something very deep. The castle itself rose above them like a cliff face made of windows, lit from within, enormous in the way of things that had been built not merely large but intentionally large, to communicate something about the intentions of the builders. Harry looked up at it and thought, yes, all right. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall and explained the houses with an air of someone who had explained this many times and retained a professional pride in the clarity of her delivery. Harry listened and watched her face, sharp and precise, the face of someone who meant what she said and would not pretend otherwise, and decided he respected her immediately. The other students were nervous. Harry could feel it radiating off them in the way heat radiates off stone in summer. He understood the nervousness, new place, new rules, being judged and sorted before you'd learned anything about the place you were being sorted into. He wasn't nervous. He didn't know exactly what he was instead. Alert, maybe. Interested. Waiting for something he couldn't name. They were filed into the great hall, and the ceiling was the sky. He'd read that it was enchanted to look like the sky. Hermione had explained this on the boats with the energy of someone keeping herself calm through information. But Harry looked up at it and thought it was more than a reflection. The magic in that ceiling was genuine and very old, and something in the old magic was aware of him the same way Gringotts had been aware of him. He kept his eyes forward. The hat. Harry waited while names were called alphabetically. Hermione went to Gryffindor with an almost embarrassing amount of enthusiasm. The hat barely touched her head and made its decision. Neville went to Gryffindor after a deliberation that seemed to cause Neville himself significant stress. Draco Malfoy went to Slytherin with the speed of inevitability. Ron Weasley went to Gryffindor with his brothers cheering from the table. "Potter, Harry!" The whispers moved through the hall like a wave. Harry walked to the stool and sat, and the hat came down over his eyes and the world went dark. The hat spoke. Not loudly, not grandly, a private voice, right inside the ear, confidential and thoughtful. Well, I don't get these very often." "Get what?" Harry thought. "You." A pause. The hat seemed to be reaching, probing, doing something that was less like reading and more like trying to take a measurement of something that kept shifting. "You're brave enough for Gryffindor, certainly. Loyal. You've got a mind that serve Ravenclaw well. But there's something underneath all that, Mr. Potter. Something very old and very particular that doesn't map to any house I was designed to sort for. What is it? I think you know." Harry thought about the dark of the cupboard that felt like home, the dead fishermen, the thing below Gringotts that had said hello, the way the killing curse had, apparently, not killed him. Gryffindor, he thought. Not because he was afraid of any other house. He wasn't afraid of anything in this building, but because the hat was right that he was brave, and because Ron was there, and because Hermione was there, and because something in the choice felt like forward motion. He was tired of waiting in small, dark places. He wanted to be in the world. "Gryffindor," the hat shouted. The table erupted. Harry took the hat off and set it back on the stool and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down between Ron and Hermione. And the twins, Fred and George, Ron's brothers, mirror images of chaotic delight, leaned over and said in unison that they were going to have an absolutely brilliant year. Harry thought they might be right. He looked up the hall. At the staff table, most of the professors were applauding politely. Dumbledore, tall, very old half-moon spectacles above a long silver beard, wearing robes of a particular deep blue that seemed to eat the light around them, was watching Harry with an expression of layered complexity. Not surprise, something more like recalculation. There was a man beside him in a purple turban who wasn't looking at Harry at all. Was, in fact, very deliberately not looking at Harry, in the way people look away from something that frightens them. Harry noted him, set him aside for later. Under the table, almost without thinking, he pressed his palm flat against the stone bench. Something vast and old and patient pressed back. "Hello," it said, in no language that had words. "Hello," Harry thought. He picked up his fork and helped himself to the roast chicken. The year had barely begun when the first attack came, though calling it an attack was probably generous to the attacker. Harry was 3 weeks into term, learning to navigate the castle's geography, which was genuinely disorienting. The staircases moved, and the corridors had spatial opinions. When he cut through a lower corridor near the charms rooms on his way back from the library and found 2 robed men in Hogsmeade on a Hogwarts access road, who really had no business being there. He'd stopped. They'd seen him. He could tell by the way they went still. The particular stillness of people who had just found something they weren't supposed to find and were deciding what to do about it. They were older, one of them with a dark mark peeking below his sleeve that Harry didn't know by name but recognized by feel, recognized the taint of something that had been dragged from the wrong side of death and weaponized, a horrible kind of necromancy wrapped in ideology. "Look who it is," the first one said with a particular kind of slow, spreading smile, a bully's smile. Harry had an extensive personal catalog of those. "Harry Potter," the second one breathed. He had his wand out already. "Do you know how long I've been waiting for? If you're about to say you, then I'd rethink the sentence," Harry said. The man's wand was already moving. Avada Kedavra. The words came out and the light came, green, brilliant, horrible to everyone in the vicinity, and it hit Harry in the chest and the world went warm. Specifically, warm. Specifically, the way the soil in the Dursleys' garden felt on summer mornings when it had been cold all night and the sun was just getting its intention across. The green light poured into him and spread outward, and something in Harry's chest, that cool silver-dark reservoir that had always been there, absorbed it the way a deep water lake absorbs rainfall, easily, gratefully, with room to spare. He was aware that he was standing in a small crater. The flagstones beneath his feet had been blown out in a ring around him, scorched at the edges, and the grass beyond was flattened and steaming. He had not moved. His robes were unsinged. He felt better than he had all week, actually. There was a long, absolute silence. Both men were staring at him with identical expressions of blank, structural disbelief, the expression of people whose model of the universe had just run a critical error. "Did you?" one of them started. "Can we try that again?" Harry asked politely. He tilted his head. "Only I've had a headache since Transfiguration on Thursday, and I think that actually helped." The second man tried 2 more curses in rapid succession, neither killing curses, which meant he wasn't completely suicidal, but both dark and designed to cause significant harm. The first curved away from Harry before it reached him, as though it had decided it had better things to do. The second reached him and vanished, absorbed, the same way as the killing curse, a small warm bloom in his chest and then nothing. Harry raised an eyebrow. "Right," he said. He raised his wand, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, warm in his hand, and thought carefully about what he wanted to do. He didn't want to kill them. He wasn't sure he was capable of it yet, practically speaking. He'd had 3 weeks of lessons. He knew Wingardium Leviosa and a handful of basic charms. But he had a sense, an instinct, the same instinct that found toads and felt the dead below Gringotts, that he could reach into these men's capacity for violence and find the bit of them that belonged to the dark, the dragged over, the wrongness. He reached. It was not a wand motion or an incantation. It was something deeper, something that bypassed the mechanics of British wizarding magic entirely and went somewhere older. Both men went pale, genuinely, specifically pale, the kind of pale that comes from abrupt cold, from suddenly perceiving a door they had not previously known was there and understanding, with absolute clarity, where it led. "Go home," Harry said, not loud. The quiet was what carried it. "And tell anyone who asks that you saw me and then you strongly reconsidered your life choices." They ran. Actually ran, abandoned their robes at the edge of the path, one of them stumbling over his own feet. Harry watched them go. He stood in his small crater for a moment longer, feeling the warmth of the absorbed curse settle through him, feeling the castle's age at his back, feeling the dead in the stones beneath his feet going about their business. Then he picked up his bag and walked back to the common room, because he had an essay on the switching spell due on Friday, and he was only half done. Hermione was in the common room when he came in. She took one look at him, at the slight glow in his skin that faded as he sat down, at the crater dust on his shoes, at the absolute calm in his face, and put her book down and said, very carefully, "Harry, what happened to your robes?" He looked down. There was a scorched ring around the chest of his robes, perfect as a compass circle where the killing curse had hit. The fabric was charred, but underneath, visible through the hole, his skin was entirely unbroken, was in fact slightly luminescent, the way skin looks in good health or firelight. "I got hit by the killing curse," Harry said. Hermione opened her mouth. "By 2 former Death Eaters, apparently," he added, as though this were clarifying. "Near the charms corridor." Hermione stared at the hole in his robes. then at him, then back at the hole. "It didn't number, Harry," she said carefully. "The killing curse cannot be blocked, deflected, or survived. It's been thoroughly documented. There is no known counter-curse, no shield that—" "I know," Harry said. He pulled his essay toward him and unstoppered his ink. "It's puzzling." "Puzzling," Hermione repeated at a volume and pitch that suggested she did not find this to be adequate word choice. "I've been puzzled about it since I was born, essentially," Harry said. He dipped his quill. "You're welcome to help me figure it out if you want. You'd probably be better at the research side than me." The silence lasted about 4 seconds, which was how long it took Hermione to weigh the absolute unprecedented nature of the situation against the fact that she had, in fact, already been cataloging various anomalous data points about Harry Potter since the boats, and the proposition of structured research was significantly better than not doing research. "I'm going to need to make a list," she said. "I expected nothing less," Harry said. Ron chose this moment to come thundering down the boys' staircase, see both their faces, look between them, and say, "What did I miss?" with the tone of someone who could tell it was significant. "Death Eaters," Harry said. "Study group," Hermione said. Ron looked at both of them. "Brilliant," he said, and went to get biscuits. Outside, the Scottish autumn pressed against the castle windows. The castle pressed back. Deep below the foundations, in soil older than the school and older than the country it sat in, something vast and patient and watching noted with what felt extraordinarily like satisfaction that its child had come home. Harry didn't hear it yet, not in words, not clearly. But somewhere behind his sternum, the cool silver dark hummed. Chapter 2. Where the dead walk quietly, the thing about Hogwarts ghosts was that they had opinions. Harry discovered this in his second week, when nearly headless Nick floated through the wall of the Gryffindor common room while Harry was alone at the table finishing the switching spell essay. Nick arrived with the theatrical melancholy of someone who had been practicing it for 5 centuries and said with great gravity that he had a message. "From who?" Harry asked, without looking up from his parchment. "From all of us," Nick said. Then, when Harry looked up, "The ghosts of Hogwarts, Mr. Potter." "We would very much appreciate a word." Harry put down his quill. "All right." Nick led him, which was an unusual experience, following something that drifted slightly above floor level and occasionally forgot to go around walls instead of through them, to a room on the 4th floor that Harry hadn't found yet. It was a small room, clearly not used for anything official, the kind of space that accumulated in large old buildings between purposeful architecture. It had no windows. It had, currently, 11 ghosts. All of them were looking at Harry. The fat friar looked hopeful. The bloody Baron, Slytherin's ghost, silver-stained and severe, stood apart from the others with the bearing of someone who had come under protest and would leave the moment decorum permitted. The Grey Lady, Helena Ravenclaw, stood very still in the corner and watched Harry with dark, ancient eyes that held something deeper than the standard ghost's gentle melancholy. She held herself differently than the others, more carefully, like someone carrying weight they had learned to balance precisely. "We've been aware of you since before the boats," Nick said. He'd arranged himself near the front in a way that suggested he'd been elected spokesperson and was taking the role seriously. Since you entered the grounds." "I know," Harry said. "I've felt it." This apparently surprised several of the ghosts, who exchanged looks with the specificity of people confirming a theory. "You feel us," said a ghost Harry hadn't seen before, a thin woman in Elizabethan dress who stood to Nick's left and had an expression of intense scholarly focus. "You perceive our presence directly." "Is that unusual?" Harry asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "For a living person, yes," the Grey Lady said from the corner. Her voice was low and precise, the kind that had been used to careful speech for so long that carefulness had become its natural quality. "For someone like you, someone like me," Harry said. The Grey Lady looked at him steadily. "You know what you are," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm getting there," Harry said honestly. The bloody Baron made a sound like distant gravel shifting. Several of the lesser ghosts looked at him nervously. He crossed his arms and said nothing further, but his eyes, pale and sharp and deeply attentive, stayed on Harry. "We wanted to offer ourselves," Nick said with more dignity than the sentence's strangeness warranted. Well, I don't know that advisors is the right word. Witnesses. We've been here a very long time. We know things about this castle that no living person knows. And we thought, he glanced at the others. We thought the Lord's son ought to know he has resources here if he wants them. The Lord's son. Harry turned the phrase over. The dead had their own taxonomy, their own ways of understanding hierarchy that had nothing to do with wizard politics or schoolhouses. Whatever Harry was, whatever the cool Silverdark made him, the dead at Hogwarts had already classified it in their own terms with 5 centuries of accumulated certainty. I appreciate it, Harry said. He meant it. The Grey Lady stepped forward from the corner, the first time she'd moved since Harry entered the room. She stopped about 3 feet away and looked at him with that measuring, ancient gaze. There is something in this castle, she said. That should not be here. You'll feel it when you're near it. A wrongness. She paused. We have all felt it. We cannot approach it. But you, a slight inclination of her head. You may want to find it eventually. What is it? Harry asked. Something that was made by walking on the wrong side of a door that was never meant to open, she said. You'll understand when you find it. She drifted back. The meeting was apparently over, because the other ghosts began dissipating in their various ways. The fat friar through the floor, the Elizabethan woman through the wall with her scholarly focus still intact, Nick through the door with the dignity of someone using the actual exit. The bloody Baron paused last. He looked at Harry for a long, unreadable moment. Then he bowed. Not the nod Nick had done, a real bow, old and deep and deliberate. Harry, who had no idea of the protocol here, bowed back. The Baron drifted through the wall without another word. Harry stood alone in the small room for a moment, listening to the castle. It sounded different from up here. You could hear the building's age in the stone, the way a tree's rings are its biography, and the castle's biography was very long and included events that no living historian had recorded, but that the stone remembered perfectly. He could hear them, dimly, the way you hear a conversation through a closed door, not the words, but the shape of what was said. He picked up his bag from where he'd left it in the corridor and went back to finish his essay. Hermione's list had grown to 2 feet of parchment by the end of October. She'd started with the observable facts and worked outward. Item 1. Subject survived killing curse at age 1. Item 2. Subject survived killing curse again on September 19th, approximate. See attached notes with no apparent harm. Item 3. Subject absorbed secondary dark curses. Item 4. Subject demonstrated extrasensory awareness of living creatures. See Toad incident. Item 5. Goblins of Gringotts reacted to subject's presence in a manner inconsistent with standard celebrity recognition. The list went on. She'd added 3 items after the library incident, which was when Harry had walked into the restricted section to return a book Madame Pince had incorrectly shelved, and the books had gone quiet. Not the groaning and complaining that Hermione had heard described. They'd simply stopped, sat still, as though in the presence of something they respected or feared or both. You made the restricted section books behave, Hermione said over breakfast on the morning she added that item. They were being dramatic, Harry said over his porridge. Harry, restricted section books have been charmed to be actively hostile. They bite, they scream, they've been known to chase students. They don't just go quiet for people. Well, Harry said, I didn't ask them to. Hermione wrote, Item 14, passive pacification of aggressively enchanted materials, and underlined it twice. Ron watched this exchange with the calm of someone who had recalibrated his baseline for normal over the first 7 weeks of term. He'd come a long way from the compartment on the train. He'd seen Harry locate a missing potion's ingredient by extending one hand and going still for 4 seconds. He'd seen Harry talk a staircase into holding its position, genuinely talk to it, under his breath, while 3 Hufflepuffs watched in complete bafflement when it started to shift under their feet. He'd seen Harry absorb a stray stinging hex from a second year's practice session in the corridor, with no reaction other than a slight blink. Ron's method of processing all of this was different from Hermione's lists. He'd simply decided that Harry was extraordinary in ways that were specific and unprecedented, and that this was fine, and had adjusted his behavior accordingly, which is to say, not much at all, because Ron treated Harry exactly as he treated everyone else, which was with direct and uncomplicated loyalty and absolutely no fuss. Harry found this quietly to be one of the most valuable things in his life. The thing the Grey Lady had warned him about, the wrongness, Harry found it in November, during a Thursday evening when he was taking a shortcut through the third-floor corridor to get to astronomy from dinner. He'd been told the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side was forbidden, off-limits, do not enter under any circumstances. He hadn't needed telling. He'd felt the prohibition from the ground floor, felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, the difference in the castle's quality around that door. He stopped outside it. Locked. He could hear something breathing behind it, something large, something alive in the specific way that things trained and kept and pointed were alive. But beyond the dog, beyond the lock, there was the wrongness the Grey Lady had described. She was right. It was impossible to mistake. It felt like a coin with two faces. One side was an ordinary magical object with a clear, single purpose. The other side felt diseased. Not cursed in the technical sense, not dark magic applied from outside. Diseased from within. Something that had been made wrong or had become wrong, that existed in a state of permanent half-life, reaching for both sides of a door it could never fully cross. Harry pressed his palm flat against the third-floor door. The wrongness pressed back, frantic and reaching, the way a trapped animal presses against the bars of its cage. He took his hand away. Not tonight. He had astronomy in 8 minutes, and Professor Sinistra gave detentions for tardiness with the enthusiasm of someone who enjoyed detention supervision as a concept. He filed the door away and went to class. The Quidditch pitch in November was an education in what Scottish weather considered appropriate. Harry sat on his broomstick, the school broom, a Comet 260 with a vibration problem above 40 miles an hour, which he intended to do something about eventually, and watched the Gryffindor tryouts from a hover at 40 feet and thought about what it would feel like to actually fly properly. The answer turned out to be correct. He'd known it was right the moment the broom rose under him, back in the first flying lesson with Madame Hooch. Not the tentative rise of someone learning, just up, immediately, with a confidence that the broom itself seemed to share. Madame Hooch had stared at him for a full 3 seconds before remembering to tell the rest of the class to keep their heels down. McGonagall had appeared from the castle in the middle of the lesson and said, with a constrained sort of delight, that Harry was to come to her office after class. So now he was on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, which was unexpected, and which Ron received with the specific joy of someone who considered Quidditch to be the deepest moral good, and which Hermione received with pragmatic acceptance because she understood, correctly, that Harry had clearly been going to be exceptional at this, and there was no academic argument to be made against it. Harry was not, it should be said, the kind of person who needed to excel at things to feel validated by them. He was perfectly happy to be mediocre at potions. The theory was interesting, the precise delicacy of the physical process, the cutting and stirring and exact timing, was something he was still developing. Snape circled his cauldron on Thursdays with an expression of layered contempt that Harry received with equanimity, because Snape was, quite obviously, a complicated person doing an impression of a simple one. The contempt wasn't really about Harry's potions. Harry was not going to pretend otherwise or take it personally. "Adequate," Snape said, the first time Harry's potion came out within acceptable parameters. "Thank you," Harry said. Snape looked at him as though searching for the insolence. Finding none, he moved on. Flying was different from potions, though. Flying felt like the physical expression of something he already knew, the freedom of the dark, the openness of height, the particular exhilaration of speed. On a broomstick at 80 feet, he was exactly what he was, unencumbered by the weight of other people's expectations or the narrow geometry of corridors and cupboards. He found the snitch in his first match in 4 minutes and 7 seconds. The crowd, which is to say, most of the school, made a noise that he felt in his molars. Wood, the Gryffindor captain, grabbed him by both shoulders and shook him with the speechless gratitude of a man reprieved. Harry held up the snitch, let the cheering wash over him, and noticed on the pitch below that the Slytherin team was consulting in a tight cluster, with expressions that ranged from furious to genuinely unsettled. Draco Malfoy, standing at the edge of the cluster, was watching Harry with an expression that had moved beyond the complicated contempt of their first meeting into something harder to label. Not admiration. Draco had been carefully raised away from admiration as an appropriate response to Potter. But something. Recognition, maybe. The particular assessment of someone realizing that the narrative they'd been given about a person was incomplete. Harry caught his eye, nodded very slightly, moved on. In the stands, Hermione had her notebook open and was writing item 17. Snitch capture under 4 minutes and 30 seconds. First competitive match with one hand and clapping with the other, which was physically improbable and very on brand. The broom started misbehaving in the second match. Harry was 300 feet up, circling wide, eyes sweeping the pitch in the particular open focus way that snitch-seeking required, present everywhere, attached to nothing when the broom lurched. Hard, not a mechanical vibration. This was intentional, a bucking and twisting that tried to throw him sideways, and Harry grabbed with both hands and locked his knees and held on through pure physical stubbornness, while below him the crowd screamed and Hermione stood up and Ron went the color of old chalk. The broom bucked again, and again, trying with real directed intent to launch him into the sky 300 feet above a stone pitch. Harry locked his ankles and thought clearly at the broom. Absolutely not. He didn't know if broomsticks had anything equivalent to a consciousness. This one seemed to pause at his mental tone. Then the external force lifted, suddenly, in the way a hand lifts when the person holding something realizes they've been caught. Harry felt the curse. Because it was a curse, someone was jinxing his broom from the stands, snapped back to nothing, and the comet settled back to its normal slightly vibratory flight. Something else happened in that same moment. Something Harry noticed, because he was paying attention to his own physical state with the particular awareness of someone who'd been absorbing dark magic for months and had developed a feel for it. The snap of the lifted curse was followed by a small, specific warmth in his left knee, which had an old scar on it, Dudley's doing from a bicycle incident 3 years ago, and which had ached ever since in cold weather. The ache was gone. The scar was gone. He checked, automatically, pressing his fingers to his knee through his Quidditch trousers. Smooth skin where the scar had been. He would think about that later. Right now he had a snitch to catch. He caught it in 7 minutes, which under the circumstances was fine. In the changing room afterward, Wood was debriefing the team with military thoroughness, and Harry sat on the bench and thought about what he'd felt, the curse, the source, the direction it had come from. He'd oriented on it automatically during the bucking, the same instinct that found toads and felt the dead, and the direction had been consistent. The stands, lower level, east side, faculty section. He thought about the man in the purple turban who hadn't looked at him at the sorting feast. Hermione found him outside the changing room with her notebook and the focused intensity of someone who had observed something and needed to debrief it immediately. "Your broom was being jinxed," she said without preamble. "I know," Harry said. "I saw someone in the stands, their eyes didn't move during the whole thing and they were muttering." "Quirrell," Harry said. Hermione stopped, recalibrated. "Are you sure?" "Direction was right," Harry said, "and the scar on my knee healed when the curse broke, the one Dudley gave me." Hermione looked at his knee, then at her notebook, then at Harry. She wrote for a moment with the focused intensity of the truly driven. "The curse healing you," she said slowly. "Harry, this is the 3rd independent instance where a dark magical attack has resulted in physical improvement. The killing curse on September 19th resolved your headache. The stray stinging hex healed the blistering on your right hand from the potions incident. And now this." She looked up. Dark magic isn't hurting you, it's repairing you. When you say it like that, it sounds straightforward, Harry said. It is anything but straightforward, Hermione said with some force. Harry, dark magic, the killing curse specifically, works by inflicting death, by accelerating, forcing, causing death. The fact that it's healing you means that your fundamental relationship with death it's the opposite of what it is for everyone else. Death doesn't come to you when the curse hits. It goes. She stopped, worked through it. It goes away from you. It can't take root. I'm what? Harry asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated. I need to do more research, she said, which from Hermione meant I have a theory that I'm not ready to state until I'm certain. Harry had learned to read this. He nodded and let her keep the theory for now. Ron was beside them both suddenly, slightly out of breath from running from the stands. Brilliant catch, he said immediately, and then, also I saw Quirrell's mouth moving the whole time your broom was going mental. What are we doing about that? Watching, Harry said. For now. Ron opened his mouth. I know where the thing on the 3rd floor is, Harry said. I think Quirrell is trying to get to it. I want to understand what's happening before I move. Ron processed this. Right, so watching. Watching, Harry confirmed. Fine, Ron said, and fell into step beside him and didn't push it further because Ron had the excellent quality of trusting Harry's judgment on things where Harry clearly had more information. But if he tries to kill you again, then he'll have another problem, Harry said. Right, good. Ron paused. The catch was brilliant, by the way, absolutely brilliant. Did you see Flint's face when Harry let him talk. The castle settled around them as they walked, warm and enormous, full of the living and the dead and the various things in between. And somewhere in the lower levels, something old and patient continued its long, uninterrupted vigil. The Mirror of Arist was in an abandoned classroom on the 5th floor, which Harry found not by looking, but by following the quality of the air. It was December, 3 days before the Christmas holidays, the castle half-emptied of students, and the corridors gone quiet in the particular way of large buildings with fewer people in them. Harry had been awake at 2 in the morning. He slept lightly. Always, the dead were more active at night, and the activity was not unpleasant, but it was present, and had gone for a walk with the old green light warmth sitting in his chest like a coal. He felt the mirror from 2 floors away. Not wrongness, not like the 3rd floor. Something else. An extremely powerful enchantment with the specific frequency of longing, or the magical equivalent of it, a vibration that resonated with wanting. He followed it the way you follow music through a building, turning toward it when it got louder, until he pushed open a classroom door and found it. The mirror was enormous. Gold frame with an inscription along the top that took him a moment to parse, Arist stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi, which resolved, when he ran it backward in his head, into I show not your face but your heart's desire. He stood in front of it for a long moment, hands in his pockets, looking at the inscription, and then he looked at his reflection. His reflection looked back. And beside his reflection, a woman with red hair and green eyes who was looking at him with an expression he had never seen directed at him before, not once in 10 years of living, an expression of absolute, uncomplicated love. The kind that didn't need anything from him. She was not a ghost. She was something more vivid and more painful than a ghost. He stayed very still. Beside the woman, his mother, clearly his mother, the eyes in the mirror were his own eyes looking back, was the shape of a man. Taller than Harry expected. Dark-haired like Harry, but with something to his face that Harry now recognized instinctively as Echo. The kind of face that appears in a later generation, the brow, the jaw, the quality of the gaze, changed by time and circumstance but fundamentally unchanged in its architecture. The man in the mirror was not James Potter. Harry had seen photographs of James Potter. The shape in the mirror was not him. This figure was taller, broader at the shoulder, with a stillness to him that James Potter, by all accounts, had never possessed. This figure stood like something geological, like he had been standing in the same place for a very long time and expected to continue. The man's eyes in the mirror were gray, very dark gray, and they looked at Harry with something that was not the easy, familiar pride of a father who had watched his son grow up. It was older than that. It was the kind of regard that comes from a very long time of knowing. Knowing not in the accumulated years sense, but in the fundamental sense. Knowing the way a river knows the shape of its bed. Harry looked at his mother's face for a long time, then at the man's face. Then he took his hands out of his pockets, nodded once at both of them, and stepped back. He sat down on the classroom floor, back against a desk, and thought. Hermione had told him, 2 weeks ago, "Your fundamental relationship with death is the opposite of what it is for everyone else." She'd stopped there, hadn't stated the theory. Harry had let her keep it. He'd been letting himself keep it, too. The pieces were all there. Had been there since the lift at Gringotts, since the dead fishermen, since old Mr. Fig's husband in the garden. He'd been carrying the conclusion at arm's length, turning it around, examining it without quite setting it down and reading it straight. His mother had loved a man. Not James Potter. James Potter was real. James Potter had existed and died and by all accounts been a good man and loved Lily Evans genuinely. But Lily Evans had, at some point, also loved something else. Something that walked the earth in a shape like a man's shape, for some brief time. Something that left behind a son who could not die. Harry thought about the enormous thing below Gringotts that had said hello. He thought about the gray-eyed figure in the mirror who had stood like something geological. He sat on the classroom floor and let the conclusion land. "All right," he said quietly, to no one in particular because no one was in the room. The darkness in the classroom, and it was very dark, no torches, only the silver quality that the mirror emitted, hummed very softly, the way darkness hums when it is more than the absence of light. Harry got up. He had breakfast in 4 hours and he needed at least some sleep, and there was a transfiguration practical before lunch that he wanted to be sharp for. He walked to the door, then stopped and looked back at the mirror. His reflection was still there, just his reflection now, no figures beside it. Just Harry Potter, 11 years old in the dark, looking at himself with calm green eyes that had never been afraid of what they saw. He left the mirror where it was and went back to the dormitory. Hermione found the book in the 3rd week of December, the day before the last students left for Christmas. It was a very old book. She'd been combing through the restricted section with a note from Professor Flitwick, who she'd convinced to sign one on the grounds of an essay on Charm's history that didn't exist yet but would, very thoroughly, by January. And it was shelved between a book on blood curses and a book on the theoretical thresholds of mortal magic, which was already interesting company. The Chthonic bloodlines, mortal inheritances of the underworld's court. She brought it to the common room wrapped in her robes and set it on the table in front of Harry without ceremony. He looked at the title. He looked at her. "I wrote it down as item 21, she said, sitting across from him. "I was going to say that your fundamental relationship with death is the opposite of other people's because death doesn't come for you when a killing curse hits you. It goes away. And the reason death goes away from you is that you have a prior claim on it. Because of who you are." She put her finger on the book's spine. "The Olympian gods, according to this, which is ancient and possibly not entirely reliable, but is consistent with 12 other sources I cross-referenced, occasionally had children with mortals. Mortals who then inherited something of the divine parent's domain. Children of Poseidon who couldn't drown, children of Hephaestus who couldn't burn." She paused. "Children of Hades who couldn't die." The fire crackled. Ron, who had been pretending to do his homework on the other side of the table, was not pretending anymore. "You're saying," Ron said slowly, "that Harry's dad is not James Potter," Harry said. His voice was even. He pulled the book toward him and opened it. "I've been figuring that out for a while." Ron stared at him. "And you're not upset." Harry turned a page. "I didn't know James Potter. I'm sorry he died." "But I never had a father, Ron. The idea of one is, he found the right chapter. I'm more interested in the actual information." Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. They had a brief, entirely silent conversation about the precise emotional register of what Harry had just said and what the appropriate response was. They landed correctly on letting Harry lead. Page 47, Hermione said, leaning forward. The passage about passive death immunity and its active forms. Harry read it. The child of the underworld king does not merely resist death, they inhabit it. Death is their inheritance, their domain, their native element. As a fish cannot drown, as a bird cannot fall from air, so the child of Hades cannot be destroyed by the force they embody. Moreover, the domain they carry is active, not passive. It grows as they grow, deepens as they learn its nature, and can, in time, be consciously directed. In time, Harry thought. In time, consciously directed. He closed the book. Right, he said. Harry, Hermione said carefully. I'm fine, he said. It was true. Not the automatic, deflecting fine of someone who wasn't. The actual fine of someone who had received new information about themselves and slotted it into the existing framework with a satisfying click. He'd known the shape of this for months. The book just gave it a name. What are you going to do? Ron asked. Keep going, Harry said. Quirrell is trying to get whatever's on the third floor. There's something wrong with it, something wrong with him too. That wrongness is the same quality as the third floor. I can feel it. He stood up and stretched. We need to know what's being kept down there. The Philosopher's Stone, Hermione said, and both boys looked at her. She looked briefly pleased, then returned to businesslike. I figured it out last week. Nicholas Flamel, the vault at Gringotts, Dumbledore's name on the protection, it's the Philosopher's Stone. The alchemical stone that produces the elixir of life. Someone is trying to steal immortality. She paused. Which is deeply ironic, given present company. Harry considered this for a moment, and then started laughing, genuinely, properly, the laugh of someone who has found the universe's sense of humor unexpectedly dark and very good. Ron, after a moment, started laughing too, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Hermione looked between them, and then the corner of her mouth turned up, and then she was laughing as well, and the fire crackled. And outside the castle the Scottish winter pressed down with ice and intention, and somewhere below the foundations the something vast and patient hummed to itself in the dark. They stayed in the common room until the fire burned low, talking about the stone and Quirrell, and what they knew and what they needed to know. And when they finally went to bed, the castle felt warmer than it had when they'd sat down. In the mirror on the 5th floor, left alone in its empty classroom, the reflection of a gray-eyed man in the silver light stood patient and still and enormously proud. Chapter 3. What lives in the dark January came to Hogwarts the way January always came to Scotland, without apology and with considerable ice. The castle adjusted its internal temperature through some combination of enchantment and sheer architectural stubbornness, but the corridors near the outer walls stayed cold, and the windows stayed frosted, and the general quality of the air had the particular bite of a season that had no patience for anything soft. Harry liked it. He liked the stripped-back quality of winter, the way it reduced everything to essentials. The trees around the lake stood bare and exact against the white sky. The lake itself had gone dark and still. The dead below it were quieter in winter, he'd noticed, not absent, just slower, the way everything metabolized at a lower rate in cold. He'd stand at the edge of the lake in the mornings before breakfast sometimes, just for a few minutes, watching the dark water, and the fishermen and the old drowned things below would acknowledge him in their slow, seasonal way, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. Hermione had finished her research in the holiday period and presented her conclusions the evening of January 2nd. When she and Harry and Ron reconvened in the common room after Christmas, with the shared purposefulness of people who'd been thinking independently about the same problem, and were ready to compare notes. Her notes took up 4 feet of parchment and were organized with a color-coded system that Ron looked at and immediately looked away from. Harry's notes took up half a page and consisted of 6 bullet points, which made Hermione twitch visibly. "They're complete thoughts," Harry said. They're fragments, Hermione said. They agree with everything on your 4 feet of parchment, Harry said. She checked. They did. She put her 4 feet of parchment down with the expression of someone who had won the argument on principle regardless. The conclusions were these. Quirrell was being used. Something was living in or on him. The wrongness Harry had been tracking since the sorting feast was not native to Quirrell, but parasitic. A presence that had attached itself to the professor and was operating through him with the patient, calculated intelligence of something that understood it, was currently without a body, but was working on the problem. The philosopher's stone was the solution it was working toward. The stone made the elixir of life. The elixir of life made a body, and whatever was writing Quirrell wanted a body with an urgency that made Quirrell's nervous stammer seem almost sympathetic by comparison. "It's Voldemort," Harry said. Ron flinched at the name. Harry noticed and didn't comment on it. "Almost certainly," Hermione said. "The timing, the motive, the methodology. He was destroyed when the killing curse rebounded on him, but destroyed isn't the same as dead, especially if he had precautions in place. He'd know about the stone. He'd have the knowledge and the motivation to attempt possession of a host." "What I want to know," Ron said, recovering, "is what Dumbledore's doing about it. He has to know, right?" "Dumbledore knows everything that happens in this castle." Harry thought about this. He thought about Dumbledore's face at the sorting feast, that layered, complex expression of recalculation. He thought about the defenses on the 3rd floor, which were real and substantial, but which also, upon reflection, had the quality of a test as much as a genuine barrier. He thought about a man who had been planning something for years, very carefully, very quietly, who might have different intentions than the ones he expressed. "I think," Harry said slowly, "that Dumbledore knows more than he's done anything about, on purpose." Hermione looked at him. "You think he's letting it happen?" "I think he wants to see what happens," Harry said, which was different, subtler, more troubling in certain ways than simple negligence. Ron looked between them. He's Dumbledore. He's the greatest wizard. Being the greatest wizard at something and being right about every decision are 2 different things," Harry said without particular heat. He wasn't angry at Dumbledore. He didn't have enough information yet to be angry. He was noting, with the careful attention he developed for the living, that the headmaster was a person with a plan, and Harry was not in the plan's confidence, and that was worth knowing. "So what do we do?" Ron asked. "We wait," Harry said. "And we keep watching Quirrell." Watching Quirrell in February was an experience that became increasingly uncomfortable, not because of anything dramatic, but because of the inverse. Quirrell was deteriorating. Harry could feel it from across classrooms, from the corridor outside the defense room, from the staff table at dinner. The wrongness was getting stronger, spreading through Quirrell's personal atmosphere the way ink spreads through water, slowly, then faster, then present in everything. Quirrell's hands shook. He knocked things over. He had the hollow quality of a person being consumed from inside, and Harry watched it with a feeling that wasn't quite pity, but wasn't nothing either. Whatever was in Quirrell was not being gentle with its host. In March, the chess game happened. Not the literal one, that came later. This was the corridor outside the library, a Tuesday afternoon, Harry heading in and 3 Slytherin 4th years heading out, and one of them recognizing Harry and making a decision that 4th-year Slytherins in possession of dark arts theory and no operational judgment occasionally made. It was a cruciatus. Not full-powered, the boy didn't have the capacity for full-powered, and the curse required genuine will behind it, genuine desire to cause pain, and the boy's genuine desire was mostly theatrical, but it was real, properly cast, and it hit Harry between the shoulder blades, and the sensation was, Harry stopped walking. He stood in the corridor for about 2 seconds, head slightly tilted, running a diagnostic on the experience. It didn't hurt. Not exactly. It was not pleasant. There was a quality to it like static, like every nerve ending briefly filing a complaint through bureaucratic channels. But it was not the agony it was supposed to be. The dark component of it, the component that reached in to cause pain, by telling the nervous system it was dying, hit the cool silver dark in Harry's chest and dissolved. What remained was approximately 20% of the physical sensation, which was unpleasant the way stubbing your toe was unpleasant. He turned around. The fourth year who'd cast it was staring at him with his wand still raised, color draining out of his face with impressive efficiency. The other two had backed against the wall. Harry looked at the caster for a moment. His name was Warrington, and he had the build of someone whose family had convinced him that size was the same thing as power. And his face right now was doing something Harry found instructive. It was the face of someone whose central mechanism for controlling the world had just stopped working, standing in front of the thing they'd been trying to control. Harry walked toward him, slowly. Not rushing, there was no need to rush. Warrington's wand hand dropped. He tried to step backward and found the wall. Harry stopped 2 feet in front of him. "The Cruciatus," Harry said conversationally, "is a torture curse. You have to mean it to cast it properly, which means you were genuinely trying to hurt me." He looked at Warrington steadily. "I'm not going to hurt you back, but I want you to think about what it means that you tried that and it didn't work." Warrington's mouth was open. "Think about it carefully," Harry said, and stepped around him and went into the library. He could hear the whispered conversation breaking out behind him before the library door had fully closed. He went and found the book he needed, Theory of Elemental Transfiguration, for the homework that was due Thursday, and settled at a table and opened it. Hermione materialized from 2 shelves over, which meant she'd been in the library when it happened and had heard. She sat down across from him and said with careful neutrality, "Are you all right?" "Fine," Harry said. Then, because she was looking at him with the expression that meant she wanted actual data, it felt like static, mostly. Hermione processed this. "Mostly. About 20%, Harry said. The part that's just physical nerve response. The death component dissolved. Because pain curses work by simulating dying," Hermione said, very quietly, the way you say things you've been working toward for a while. "They cause agony by triggering the body's death response, its fundamental terror of ending. Which doesn't work on you because I don't have a death response," Harry said. "Because death is yours," Hermione said, which was more accurate and said with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite awe. "Harry, what are you going to do when Voldemort figures that out?" Harry thought about it. "Depends on what he tries next," he said. He turned to Chapter 7 of the Transfiguration book and let that be the end of it. The stone moved in April. Harry felt the shift first. The third-floor corridor had gone from its baseline wrongness plus dog to something more activated, more urgent. The quality changed from patient waiting to imminent. He told Hermione and Ron at breakfast, and Hermione went pale in the particular way of someone who had been tracking a situation and had an idea of its destination. "He's going to try tonight," she said. "Maybe," Harry said. "Or soon." "We should tell Dumbledore," Hermione said. "You can," Harry said. "Go ahead." She went. She came back 40 minutes later with the expression of someone who had been heard politely and redirected gently and sent back to their seat without having actually accomplished anything. She sat down and looked at her plate. "He said as long as he's at the school, the stone is safe," she said. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at his eggs. "Right," Ron said. "They didn't say, and what happens when he leaves the school? They didn't need to. The night came in May in the end, not April." Harry knew it the moment he woke up, 3 in the morning, the castle humming at a different frequency than usual, the wrongness on the 3rd floor pulled taut as a wire. He sat up in bed and felt it clearly. The dog was unconscious, the barriers were being passed, something was moving downward. He got up and dressed. Ron stirred. "Harry?" "It's happening," Harry said. "You don't have to come." Ron was out of bed before Harry finished the sentence. "Don't be an idiot," Ron said, pulling on his jumper. They woke Hermione with a tap on the girls' dormitory door, and her immediate response, almost before she was awake, was, "The 3rd floor." "3rd floor," Harry confirmed. The castle at 3 in the morning had a quality it didn't have at any other hour. The human noise was gone, and what remained was the building's own sound, its deep, slow breathing, the movement of enchantments through stone, the way blood moves through a body. Harry navigated by that sound as much as by his own sight, feeling the corridor walls, feeling the direction of the wrongness like a compass needle. He moved fast. Not running, he had no reason to run. He had all the time there was. The dog was down, slumped across a trapdoor, enormous and genuinely lovely, even unconscious, 3 heads all breathing in slightly different rhythms, a harp playing itself in the corner, its song keeping the dog under. Harry paused and crouched beside the nearest head, the leftmost one, which had an ear with a slight notch in it from some old altercation, and scratched it behind the ear. The head made a sound like distant thunder and leaned into his hand even in sleep. "Good dog," Harry said quietly, then opened the trapdoor. The drop was significant. Harry went first, let himself fall, landed in the devil's snare below with the calm of someone who had looked down first and made a decision. The plant went for him immediately, tendrils wrapping his ankles, his wrists, the reflexive aggression of something that reached for things in the dark and then stopped. Completely. The tendrils went still and then slowly withdrew, all of them. The plant pulled back from Harry with the specific quality of something that had made contact with something unexpected and was reconsidering. Hermione, floating down via charm, landed beside him. "It let go of you," she said. "Things in the dark usually don't mind me," Harry said. Ron dropped down next, hit the snare, yelped, and was released when Hermione hit it with Lumos Solemn. The plant recoiled from the light, and they were through. The keys were Ron's domain. He had the clearest spatial sense for moving objects, and Hermione calculated the entry charm while Ron spotted the right key on a broom. The chess set was Ron's in the most absolute sense. He walked onto the board and looked at the pieces, and the pieces looked at him, and there was a moment where Ron understood something about himself, Harry thought, that he'd been unclear on before. He wasn't here because Harry was extraordinary. He was here because he was genuinely, specifically good at this, and it mattered. He played brilliantly, cold and clear and fast, sacrificing pieces with the efficiency of someone who understood that the game's objective mattered more than any individual piece. Harry watched him from the far edge of the board and felt with simple certainty that Ron was someone worth having beside you. When Ron sacrificed himself, moved his knight to the square that would get it taken, understanding that it was the move that opened the board, Harry stopped him with a hand on his arm. "There's another way," Harry said, and looked at the opposing queen, and the queen looked at him. The chess pieces had a kind of consciousness, not complex, not human, but real, and this one looked at Harry with its blank carved face and felt, to Harry's awareness, like the devil's snare had felt. Something that inhabited the dark recognizing something that owned it. The queen lowered her weapon very slowly and stepped aside. The board went quiet. Ron stared. "How did you?" I asked, Harry said. He moved through the gap the queen had made, and Hermione followed, and Ron came last with the expression of someone updating his understanding of the rules. The troll was already unconscious. Quirrell had dealt with it on the way through, which told Harry he'd been here recently. The potion logic puzzle was Hermione's, solved in about 90 seconds with the focused efficiency of someone for whom logic puzzles were aggressive relaxation. She handed Harry the correct potion. "There's only enough for one," she said. "Harry, go back," Harry said. "Get Ron out, send an owl to Dumbledore." Hermione, Harry said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I'm the right person for what's on the other side of this door." She held his gaze for 3 seconds, which was how long it took her to run through the argument and accept that he was correct. "Don't be stupid," she said, which was as close to be careful as Hermione got under pressure. "I'll try," Harry said, and drank the potion and walked through the black flame. The chamber beyond was a small room with a high ceiling and the mirror of Arist at its far end, and in front of the mirror back to Harry, wearing his purple turban and shaking with a fine, continuous tremor, was Quirrell. "I wondered when you'd arrive," Quirrell said. His voice was different, the stammer was gone. The voice beneath it, the voice that had been there all year under the performance, was cold and flat and clear. "I've been watching you watch me," Quirrell said, turning. His face had the hollow quality Harry had been tracking for months, worse now up close, the cheekbones sharp as carved wood. The whole year, do you know how unusual that is? An 11-year-old who knew what I was. You weren't subtle, Harry said. He looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back, just his reflection this time. You tried to kill me twice. Once with the broom, Quirrell said and smiled, and the smile was not his. The first time was a test, in September, my Death Eaters. They weren't really your Death Eaters, Harry said. They were his. He wasn't looking at Quirrell. He was looking at the mirror and feeling, in the room behind the mirror, behind the enchanted surface and the protective magic, the presence of the stone. He could feel it the way he felt the dead, as a thing that existed in a place with a specific quality. The stone was close. The stone was in the mirror. He understood the logic of the enchantment immediately. The mirror of Arist would only show it to someone who wanted the stone but not to use it. Someone who wanted it for itself, for what it was, not for what it could give them. Harry thought about what he wanted from the stone. He turned it over honestly, the way he tried to turn everything over. He wanted to understand it. He wanted to know if it could tell him anything about the boundary between life and death that he inhabited. He had no interest in immortality. He was already not going to die in the normal way. And more than that, mortality was something he respected profoundly. The dead were not lesser. They had simply gone somewhere. The stone appeared in his pocket. He didn't reach for it, didn't look down, kept his eyes on Quirrell. Quirrell had the mirror in his hands now, was looking at his own reflection with the desperation of a man searching a crowd for a face, and what Harry felt in the room shifted. The wrongness that had been in Quirrell all year was moving, consolidating, preparing. He knows, Quirrell said softly to no one visible. He knows where. Let me speak to the boy, said the voice. Not Quirrell's voice. A voice like the thing the killing curse had been before it was a curse, the raw material, before it was shaped and weaponized, before a human mind had made it into ideology and obsession. Cold, not in temperature but in the way silence is cold, in the way space is cold, in the way the absence of something warm makes you feel the warmth's absence everywhere. Quirrell went still, then, slowly, unwound the turban. Harry looked at the face on the back of Quirrell's head with the specific stillness of someone who had been expecting something, and had not entirely anticipated the specific form it would take. The face was barely a face, flat and red and snake-like with slitted eyes the color of old blood, but the eyes were sharp, and the eyes were intelligent, and the eyes looked at Harry with an expression that was genuinely complex. Not pure hatred, not fear. Something that had hatred in it and something else besides, something that might, in a human face, have been recognition. Harry Potter, said Voldemort. Voldemort, Harry said, a silence. You're not afraid of me, Voldemort said. No, Harry said. Interesting. The red eyes moved over Harry with the methodical attention of someone performing an assessment. I've killed adults who were afraid of me before they heard my name. And here you stand. He paused. You're something different from what I expected. What did you expect? Harry asked. The usual, Voldemort said. Bravery covering terror, the Gryffindor performance of courage. What I find instead is another pause longer, the red eyes narrowed. You're not performing. No, Harry said again. Quirrell, Voldemort said, and his host raised his wand, and the killing curse was a green light in the small room, filling it, and it hit Harry in the chest and the room went warm. The coal behind Harry's sternum opened like a flower. The green light poured in and spread, and the cool silver dark rose to meet it with a quality that was almost hungry, the way deep water rises toward rain. Harry felt the absorbed death settle through him and straightened slightly, the way you straighten after a deep breath. The red eyes stared. Again, Voldemort said, his voice doing something Harry had not heard it do. Something it probably hadn't done in years. Wavering. Quirrell cast again. Harry absorbed it. The room smelled like warm soil. Again, Voldemort said. The third curse was harder. Quirrell was shaking, sweating, casting with the desperation of a man watching his certainties come apart, and it hit Harry and spread, and the cool silver dark absorbed it completely and something in Harry's left shoulder, an old joint ache from a fall off the Dursleys' roof at age 7, resolved into painless ease. You should stop, Harry said to Quirrell, reasonably. "You're going to exhaust yourself." Quirrell's face was gray and running with sweat. The red eyes on the back of his head were doing something Harry had not expected. They were afraid. Not performed fear, not tactical fear. Actual fear, the specific fear of a person who has built their entire architecture of power on one foundation and discovered the foundation is wrong. "What are you?" Voldemort said. Not strategically. He genuinely wanted to know. "I'm Harry Potter," Harry said. He took a step forward. "And you already know what else, that's why you're afraid." Quirrell tried a fourth curse, not a killing curse this time, some dark binding, a restraining enchantment, and it hit Harry's wrists and the bonds appeared and then dissolved, the dark component eaten away in seconds. Harry kept walking. "Don't come closer," Quirrell said, and his voice had both of them in it now, Quirrell's terror and Voldemort's cold fury, layered over each other. "Why not?" Harry asked. He reached out and put his hand on Quirrell's arm. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Where Harry's hand made contact, the skin went white, not pale, white, and then cracked, not like broken skin but like very old plaster, and beneath the crack was a light that was not light, was the absence of the wrong thing, was whatever it looked like when the parasitic wrongness fled from the touch of something that was fundamentally inimical to it. Quirrell screamed. Not in pain. Harry didn't think it was pain. He thought it was the sensation of being released, of whatever had been holding Quirrell upright from inside suddenly letting go. Quirrell fell to his knees. The face on the back of his head contorted. Harry crouched in front of Quirrell, hand still on his arm, and looked at the face directly. Up close, the red eyes were clearer. Whatever Voldemort was right now, wraith, parasite, remnant, fragment of will clinging to a host, he was in that moment very clearly aware that he was losing. "I need you to understand something," Harry said, quietly enough that it was just between them. "This isn't over. I know it isn't over. You'll come back, probably, in some form. You're too stubborn not to." He looked into the red eyes steadily. "But you should know that everything you know about death is wrong. And every time you aim it at me, you're going to learn that until eventually you understand it." "I will kill you," Voldemort whispered, and the whisper had something in it that wasn't entirely cold anymore. "I have walked beyond death. I have made myself beyond death." "No," Harry said. "You've made yourself afraid of it. That's different." He gripped Quirrell's arm harder and felt the wrongness surge and thrash, and the door between life and death that Quirrell's host body had been inadvertently propping open all year cracked wide. Harry felt it open the way you feel a window open across a room, a change in pressure, a change in quality. The doorway between here and not here yawned in the chamber, not visible to the eye but absolutely present, and the dead moved through it with the easy grace of things moving in their native element. They paid no attention to Harry. He was not what they were here for. They moved past him like water around a stone, and they moved toward Quirrell and through him, and what they took on their way through was the thing that did not belong there. Quirrell collapsed. The red eyes were gone. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was gone. In its place was simply the back of Quirrell's head, bare now without the turban, slightly damp, entirely ordinary. Harry sat back on his heels. He felt the door close, slowly, the pressure normalizing. The room smelled like soil after rain. Quirrell was breathing. Shallowly, slowly, but breathing. "You'll be all right," Harry said, which was optimistic but not entirely groundless. Quirrell's body had been the vessel, not the target. Without the parasite, the physical shell might recover. "Maybe." He stood up, took the Philosopher's Stone from his pocket and looked at it, small, blood-red, warm in his hand, thrumming with the specific energy of something that had been made to be a door between states. He thought about the conversation with the red eyes. "I have walked beyond death. Not beyond. Around." There was a difference. He pocketed the stone again. The voice came from the doorway, not audible in the physical sense, not vibrations in air, but present in the room the way the dead were present, clearly and directly and without pretension. "Harry." Harry turned. There was no one in the doorway. There was in the doorway a quality of presence, enormous, old, patient, that was different from the ghosts of Hogwarts, and different from the dead below the lake, and different from anything Harry had felt before in the way that a deep ocean is different from a river. Not more or less, differently scaled. A presence that was at home in darkness the way sunlight was at home in open air. You did well. The voice was not warm. It was not cold either. It was the temperature of the deepest earth, which is constant regardless of season. Harry looked into the doorway with the calm he'd maintained all night. "Are you going to tell me who you are?" he said. "You already know." "I know what you are," Harry said. "That's not the same thing." A pause. In a human, it might have been called consideration. In something this old, it was more like geological process, slow and absolute and resulting in something permanent. "I have not spoken to you before because I did not know how to be what I am in relation to what you are. A domain does not speak to its heir. It waits to be claimed." "And tonight?" Harry asked. "Tonight you opened a door I have not seen opened in 5,000 years, and you closed it cleanly." Another pause. "I thought you should know that I noticed." Harry looked at the place in the doorway where the presence was. He thought about the gray-eyed figure in the mirror of Arist, the man who stood like something geological. He thought about the lift at Gringotts, the hello below the stone. "I have questions," Harry said. "You will always have questions. That is appropriate." The presence moved, not away but deeper, the way sound moves into distance. "There will be time. You know where to find the doors." The room was ordinary again. Just a small chamber with a high ceiling, and the mirror of Arist, and an unconscious man on the floor and Harry standing in the middle of it, slightly warm, entirely unhurt, with a legendary alchemical artifact in his pocket. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. His reflection looked back, calm and clear and exactly itself. From behind him came the sound of the trapdoor, and voices, and the specific, careful cadence of someone who had been told not to rush but was rushing anyway. Dumbledore came through the door. He was not in his usual composed state. The blue robes were slightly disordered, the half-moon spectacles at an angle, and behind them his eyes were doing several things at once. He looked at Quirrell on the floor. He looked at Harry standing unharmed in the middle of the room. He looked at Harry with those layered, calculating eyes, and the expression on his face went through several states before landing on something that was simultaneously profoundly relieved and significantly unsettled. "Harry," he said quietly. "Professor," Harry said. He reached into his pocket and held out the stone. "This should probably go back where it was." Dumbledore looked at the stone in Harry's hand. He looked at Harry's face. He looked briefly at the door that Harry knew Dumbledore could not feel the way Harry felt it, but which even a wizard of Dumbledore's magnitude could probably detect the residue of. He took the stone with both hands very carefully. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," Harry said. He paused. He thought about leaving it there at no and decided against it, not out of provocation but out of preference for things being clear. "I absorbed 3 killing curses, a binding enchantment. A Cruciatus attempt earlier this term. None of them hurt me." Dumbledore's hands had gone very still around the stone. "I see," he said. His voice was even. His eyes were not. "I know you had questions about what I am," Harry said. "When you're ready to ask them directly, I'll answer them." He said it without challenge, without heat. He was 11 years old and standing in a room where he'd just done something no one alive had done, and he had the specific, settled quality of someone who had done the thing that needed doing and was ready for what came next. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," the headmaster said finally. Not yes, I'll ask, not yes to any specific proposition. Just yes, an acknowledgement of something he hadn't anticipated and hadn't yet processed. "Good," Harry said. "Can we go up? I'm starving." Behind him, Quirrell groaned faintly. Outside the castle, the Scottish night was enormous and cold and full of stars, and deep below the foundations, in the soil older than any country, the vast and patient thing let out a sound that was not audible to any living person. That was not audible at all in any frequency measurable by any instrument, but that was nonetheless, unmistakably, a sound of satisfaction. Harry felt it as warmth in his chest as he climbed through the trapdoor. He smiled very slightly and kept climbing. Chapter 4. The son receives his inheritance. The end of term arrived the way the end of things usually arrived, gradually and then all at once. Exams happened. Harry sat through them with the patient thoroughness of someone who had studied adequately and had no particular anxiety about the results, which drove Hermione mildly insane in the way that watching someone who hadn't revised perform competently always did. "You got higher than me in charms," she said, when the results came back. "The practical was good," Harry said. "You didn't study the practical." "I practiced it," Harry said, which was different, and Hermione opened her mouth and then closed it because he was right. Ron had passed everything, which he received with the relief of a man reprieved, and Fred and George had sent a note down from their dormitory that consisted entirely of the word legend written 47 times, which Ron found embarrassing and Harry found funny. The Quirrell situation had been handled with the specific institutional delicacy that Hogwarts applied to anything that would cause widespread panic if stated plainly. Quirrell was in St. Mungo's. The official story involved a magical accident during independent research. The Philosopher's Stone was being moved to a location Dumbledore declined to specify, which was probably for the best. Harry had been called to Dumbledore's office twice, once the night of the confrontation, once the following week, and both conversations had been thorough and cautious, and had the quality of two people feeling out the exact dimensions of what they knew about each other. Dumbledore was good at this. Harry gave him that. The headmaster asked his questions sideways, through other questions, building understanding by accumulation rather than direct inquiry. He was trying to determine how much Harry knew, and what Harry intended to do with it, and whether Harry could be the word Dumbledore avoided using, but that Harry could feel the shape of beneath every sentence, guided. Harry answered honestly where honesty was reasonable and redirected elsewhere with pleasant, uncomplicated firmness. He had nothing to hide. He simply wasn't going to perform ignorance for someone else's comfort. At the end of the second meeting, Dumbledore had looked at him over the half-moon spectacles with those ancient, deeply intelligent eyes and said, "You're not what I expected, Harry." "I know," Harry said. "I think you should update your expectations." Dumbledore had made a sound that, in a less composed man, might have been a laugh. "Perhaps," he said. The train south was noisier than the train north had been. End-of-term energy. The collective relief of a student body released from examinations. The social loosening of 7 months of shared space, resulting in a casual, comfortable familiarity. Harry shared a compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville, and a Ravenclaw called Luna Lovegood, who had attached herself to their group somewhere around March, in the specific way of people who find other unusual people, and decide that proximity is logical. Luna was very strange in ways Harry found restful. She believed in things that didn't exist and said so with complete serenity, and she had a quality of absolute unperturbability that Harry recognized because he had a version of it himself, though arrived at differently. She looked at Harry on the train and said, conversationally, "You smell like soil after rain. You always have. It's lovely." Harry looked at her. "Thank you." "Most people smell like living," Luna said. "It's perfectly fine, but you smell like the bit between." Ron was staring. Hermione had her pen out. "You can smell that?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. "Not everyone can," Luna said, and returned to her magazine, which was upside down. Harry turned back to the window and watched England arrive from the north, the landscape greening as they went south, the hills flattening, the industry of the Midlands giving way to suburbs, the whole human enterprise of the living world coming back into view after a school year that had been something considerably more than expected. He thought about what was waiting. Number 4, Privet Drive received him with the enthusiasm it reserved for all arrivals, which was to say, none. Vernon met him at the door with the specific expression he'd been developing for 11 years, the one that combined deep discomfort with performed authority, and said that Harry was to be quiet, to be invisible, and to be of no trouble whatsoever for 2 months, at which point the school could have him back and Vernon would be grateful. "Fine," Harry said, and carried his trunk upstairs. Dudley had been told that the school had made Harry do things with his hair, which was the story Petunia had invented to explain why Harry's hair now behaved slightly better than the hurricane it had previously been. An improvement Harry attributed not to any effort on his part, but to the fact that Hogwarts water apparently had subtle enchantments in it. Dudley had accepted this with the incuriosity that characterized most of Dudley's engagement with Harry, which was not malice exactly, but the absence of interest that was sometimes harder to sit with. Harry did not particularly mind Privet Drive in summer. He minded it less than he used to. He had context now, Hogwarts, the letters of Ron and Hermione that arrived by owl with a regularity that made Petunia twitch, and the cupboard was his bedroom now, had been since the letters arrived last year, which meant he had a window and a proper bed and room enough to think. He thought, mostly, about what was coming, because something was coming. He knew that with the certainty he used for things that were spatial and real rather than speculative. Voldemort was not gone. The chamber, the confrontation, the opening of the door, all of that had been a delay, not an ending. Whatever Voldemort was now, and Harry thought about it, the specific quality of the wraith presence that had been in Quirrell, the red eyes, the voice like the cold in space, he was diminished and angry and in possession of the kind of stubborn, furious intelligence that does not stop until it has what it wants. What he wanted was a body. What he was working toward was immortality. What he believed, still, despite the evidence of 3 killing curses and an afternoon in a dungeon that should have revised his priors, was that Harry was an obstacle to be removed rather than a problem that could not be solved by removal. Harry was prepared to let Voldemort keep believing that, for a while. Not strategically, he wasn't running a long game, exactly, not in the way Dumbledore ran long games. He simply understood that there was nothing to be gained by forcing a confrontation before the confrontation was ready to happen, and that the most useful thing he could do with the summer was understand himself better. He was working on it. Hermione's book, she'd sent him a copy, carefully wrapped in brown paper labeled History of European Architecture for the Dursleys' benefit, was dense and old and fascinating. It had been written by someone with direct knowledge, not academic reconstruction, and it described the underworld's court with the specific texture of lived detail. The rivers, the fields, the bone-deep quality of the place, which was not sad or terrible but enormous and orderly, and, in its way, beautiful. The author wrote about the children of Hades with a mixture of reverence and pragmatism that Harry found genuinely useful, not the mythological inflation of the stories, but the practical reality of what it meant to carry that inheritance. They are not demigods in the conventional heroic sense, the book said, in a chapter that Harry had read 3 times. They do not perform miracles. They do not transcend the mortal world. They inhabit both, fully mortal in their living, fully sovereign in their relation to death. The domain does not come to them as a gift or a weapon. It comes as a responsibility. The dead are not subjects to be commanded. They are a community to be known. He was sitting on the roof of the garden shed, a reliable vantage point on hot afternoons, far enough from the house that Vernon's television didn't reach, and the garden was quiet, reading this passage for the 4th time when the air changed. It was the 14th of July, a Wednesday. Hot and still and smelling of cut grass from the neighbor's lawn. The sky a clean, flat blue. Harry had his back against the chimney and the book on his knee and Hedwig on the ridge of the shed roof, doing her daytime roosting impression, which consisted of being extremely spherical and unimpressed. The air changed the way it had changed in the chamber under Hogwarts, that shift in pressure, that quality of something enormous being present that had previously not been, but different. In the chamber it had come through a door. Here it came from everywhere at once, the way weather comes, and it settled over the garden with the total definitive weight of something that had decided to be here and was now, unambiguously, here. Hedwig opened one eye. The man appeared at the garden gate. He was tall, genuinely, significantly tall, not in the exaggerated way of Hagrid, but in the way of someone who was simply built at a scale slightly beyond standard. He wore a gray suit, the gray of old stone, of deep water, of the particular hour between afternoon and evening when the light goes flat. His hair was black and his face was, Harry looked at it and understood, with a jolt that was less surprise than recognition, the same recognition he'd felt looking at the mirror of Arist. His face was the original of which Harry's was a copy. The jaw, the brow, the quality of the gaze, all of it, just older and more absolute, and carrying the specific gravity of something that had existed for a very long time and had no expectation of stopping. His eyes were gray, very dark gray, and they were looking at Harry with the expression Harry had seen in the mirror, not the easy pride of a father who had watched a son grow, but something older, the regard of something that knows. He opened the garden gate and walked through it, and each step on the Dursleys' garden path was soundless, and the garden was extremely quiet, and Hedwig had gone completely still. Vernon's face appeared at the kitchen window. The man looked up at Vernon's face, briefly, with those dark gray eyes, and Vernon disappeared from the window so quickly that Harry heard the sound of the kitchen chair scraping back all the way from the shed roof. Harry set down his book. "You could have written," he said. The man stopped at the garden shed and looked up at Harry on the roof. The corner of his mouth moved, something that was not quite a smile but was related to one. "No," he said. His voice was the temperature of the deepest earth. "I couldn't have." They looked at each other. "You should come down," the man said. "We have things to discuss." Harry climbed down from the shed roof, dropped the last 6 feet, landed easy, and stood in front of the man and looked at him directly because that was the only way to look at something you needed to understand. Up close, the resemblance was even more absolute. Harry had always thought his eyes were an unusual green, not the standard color but very deep, almost black in low light, the green of the deepest parts of a forest. He understood now where that came from. Everything else was the same too, the bone structure, the quality of the stillness. All of it was the original. "Harry," the man said. "Are you going to tell me your name?" Harry asked. "I know what you are. I've known for a while, but you have a name." "Hades," the man said, and then very slightly, "though I understand if you'd prefer something else." "Hades is fine," Harry said. "It's accurate." Something in the gray eyes shifted. Relief was not the right word. Hades did not have the look of someone who experienced relief the way mortals did, but the particular quality of a held thing releasing. He had, Harry understood, been uncertain about this, which was interesting. The Lord of the Underworld, who ruled over every dead thing that had ever been, who had existed since before the concept of England, uncertain about a garden gate conversation with an 11-year-old. "Come in," Harry said. "I'll make tea." The kitchen had never been so quiet. Vernon had gone to his study, which was the furthest room from the kitchen, and had closed the door, and Harry could hear, from 2 rooms away, the specific quality of Vernon sitting completely still and breathing carefully, which was what Vernon did when he was too frightened to be loud. Petunia stood at the kitchen counter with her back to the room and made tea with the concentrated attention of someone focusing on a task to avoid engaging with reality. She had gone very white when Hades walked through the kitchen door. Not the white of surprise, the white of someone seeing something they had always known might eventually happen and had constructed their entire life around not having to face. She set 2 cups on the table without turning around and then left the room. Her footsteps went upstairs, deliberately unhurried. Harry sat down. Hades sat across from him. The kitchen chair should have looked absurd under him, being a standard privet drive kitchen chair of no particular ambition. But he sat with the same quality he stood with, the quality of having always been exactly where he was, and the chair looked appropriate. "Lily," Hades said, not a question, a beginning. "Tell me about her," Harry said. Hades looked at the cup in front of him. He had the deliberateness of someone choosing words not from a lack of feelings but from an abundance, too much, precisely held. "She was extraordinary," he said. Not in the way the wizarding world meant when they said it. Not talent or power, though she had those. She was. He paused. The pause had geological quality. She was the clearest-seeing person I had encountered in several thousand years. She looked at me and saw exactly what I was, not the myths. Not the iconography, the actual thing. His eyes came up. She wasn't afraid. She sounds like someone I would have liked, Harry said. You're very like her in that regard, Hades said. The not afraid. He studied Harry's face. You're like her in other ways, the directness, the capacity for genuine anger used rarely. You've been watching me, Harry said. Since you were born, Hades said. He said it without apology because it wasn't an action that required apology. It was a statement of what had been. I could not be here before now. There are rules even for me, but I have known what you were doing. Privet Drive, Harry said. Yes. And you left me there. The gray eyes were steady. Yes. Harry thought about being angry about this. It was a legitimate thing to be angry about, the cupboard and the Dursleys and the 10 years of deliberate isolation and managed neglect. He took the anger out and looked at it honestly. It was real. It was his. He was not going to perform an equanimity he didn't actually feel. I'm angry about that, Harry said. I know, Hades said. But I also know it's more complicated than I left you there and did nothing, so I want you to explain the complicated part. Hades looked at him for a moment with that enormous, patient regard. Lily made a choice, he said. In the moment Voldemort came, she had options. She could have run, could have fought, could have called on protections that would have preserved her. She chose to stand between you and the curse, knowing what the curse would do to her. He paused. She knew what you were. She knew that the curse wouldn't kill you. She made the sacrifice not to save you from death. She knew death couldn't take you, but to bind the magic of her love to your protection permanently. To make you untouchable by that specific evil for as long as you lived in blood protection. Petunia's house, Harry said slowly. Her sister's blood, yes. Hades' voice was even, but there was something beneath the evenness. Lily didn't just love you, Harry. She understood magic at a level that most wizards never reach. She built something in the moment of her death that has held for 10 years. Harry thought about Petunia at the kitchen counter, back turned, making tea with furious concentration. He thought about Petunia, who had never been kind, never been warm, who had resented Harry's presence with a bone-deep fervor that had always felt like more than simple cruelty. She was afraid of magic, Harry said. Petunia. She resented it because she wanted it and didn't have it. She resented your mother, Hades said, for being remarkable, and then resented you for being your mother's. He looked at Harry steadily. Her fear has been useful and her resentment has been damaging. Both things are true. And you couldn't intervene because of rules, Harry said. I could not cross into the living world to parent a child I had not publicly claimed, Hades said. The claim had to come from your side first, your acknowledgement of what you are. He paused. Tonight is the first night you are here knowing what I am. The rules permit this now. Harry thought about this. He thought about the book, the mirror, the Gringotts lift, the thing below the foundations of Hogwarts. All of it had been leading here, to this kitchen table, to this conversation. What am I claiming? Harry asked. Specifically, Hades leaned forward slightly, just slightly, the first movement that had actual urgency in it. Your domain, he said. The part of it that is yours by inheritance, not all of it, not my authority, not my court, what comes to you specifically. He looked at Harry's right hand. You have been feeling it all year, the awareness of the dead, the connection to old places, the ability to move through doors that are closed to others. Those are the surface of it. He paused. There is more, considerably more. But it comes in time, as you grow into it. What's the next layer? Harry asked. Hades looked at him with something that was not quite a smile and not quite pride and was both. Shadow travel, he said. The ability to move through the dark between places, to step into shadow here and step out of shadow there. Harry thought about the practical implications of this. Several occurred to him immediately. The Hogwarts wards, he said. The Hogwarts wards are very good, Hades said. They would slow you, they would not stop you. What else? Communication with the dead, more clearly than you currently manage words, not just feeling. The ability to sense the living as well, their proximity, their intent, the quality of their souls. He paused. And in time, the authority. The word that carries weight in the places between, the places that are neither fully living nor fully dead. Like Voldemort's wraith state, Harry said. Exactly like that, Hades said. What he has made himself into exists in a state that falls under my domain. In time, with the authority properly claimed, you could. He stopped. That is further than tonight. I'm not in a hurry, Harry said. Hades looked at him. You're very calm about this, he said. I've been building toward it for a year, Harry said. Things are calmer when you've been building toward them. The gray eyes held that not-quite smile. Then the back door opened. Vernon Dursley, who had apparently run out of capacity for sitting quietly in his study and had needed to perform authority somewhere, stood in the kitchen doorway in his dressing gown with his chest expanded and his face doing the specific plum-colored preparation for volume. Now see here, Vernon started, pointing at Hades with a finger that wanted to be decisive. Hades turned and looked at him. Vernon stopped speaking. Vernon went very pale. The pointing finger slowly lowered. Something happened in Vernon Dursley's face that Harry had never seen before. A total evacuation of the bluster and the performed authority and the theatrical anger. All of it stripped away, leaving underneath a man who was genuinely, structurally afraid and was for the first time in Harry's memory unable to cover it with noise. "Sit down," Hades said. His voice was quiet. It was also the voice of something that did not traffic in options. Vernon sat. He sat in the kitchen chair with the mechanical compliance of someone whose body had accepted an instruction before his mind had processed it. Hades looked at him for a long moment. "This child," Hades said with a precision that was more frightening than volume, "has been in your care for 10 years. He slept in a cupboard. He was fed inadequately. He was excluded from ordinary human warmth with deliberate consistency." He paused. "I am aware of all of it." Vernon's mouth was moving without sound. "I did not come here to punish you," Hades said. "That is not how I prefer to spend my time, but I want you to understand something clearly." He leaned forward just slightly, and the kitchen felt, to Harry's awareness, considerably colder. "There are things in this world that you are correct to be afraid of. I am one of them. And if this child," he glanced at Harry briefly and back to Vernon, "if he is not treated with the basic respect owed to a person, I will become aware of it, and I will find the conversation considerably less restrained than tonight's." Vernon was the color of chalk. "Are we understood?" Hades said. Vernon nodded. The nodding had a quality of involuntary muscle response rather than considered decision. "Good," Hades said and straightened and looked at Harry. "Walk with me." They walked in the garden in the long summer evening light, and Hades talked, and Harry listened, and the conversation had the quality of two people in a room full of things to say, finding the right order. Hades talked about the domain and what it meant, not theoretically but practically, what it felt like to inhabit it, what the responsibilities actually were. He talked about the dead with a matter-of-factness that Harry found deeply comfortable, the way you find a person comfortable when they talk about something you love without performing reverence or disgust. He talked about Lily. Not at length. He was not the kind of thing that talked at length about what it felt like. But enough. The way you talk about something real, specific details, the particular quality of the person, the things that made them specifically themselves rather than a general category of person. He talked about her laugh, which had apparently been unexpected and loud and frequently poorly timed. He talked about the way she'd argued, not from emotion but from evidence, building cases, dismantling assumptions, never backing down from a position she'd actually reasoned through. "She argued with me," Hades said with that not-quite smile. "About what?" Harry asked. "About the rules," he said. "About the boundaries between life and death. She thought they were negotiable, in specific cases." He looked at the sky, which was going gold at the edges. "She was correct, in some cases. She was also catastrophically wrong about the cases she was personally motivated to argue for, because she wanted to keep people she loved," Harry said. "Yes. And you couldn't agree because you would be doing it for everyone or no one." "Yes," Hades said, and there was something in the single syllable that was very old and not entirely without weight. They stood at the end of the garden where the fence met the back wall, the kitchen window yellow-lit behind them, Hedwig circling in the darkening sky above. I have a half-brother, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Hades looked at him with sharp attention. Several. I mean one who's close to my age, Harry said. I can feel there's someone. I felt it once very briefly in the direction of the Gringotts lifts going down. A different quality from the domain itself, more specific, like recognizing a voice. The gray eyes held something that might have been impressed in a contained, geological way. Nico, Hades said. Nico D'Angelo, he's 12, he's... A pause that had actual consideration in it. He has had a difficult year. Where is he? Currently, Hades said, he is in Greece. He will find his way to you in time. He finds his way to things. Should I look for him? He is not ready to be found yet, Hades said, with a certainty that settled the question. But he will be. And when he is, he will be valuable to you, and you will be, whether he admits it immediately or not, valuable to him. Harry nodded. He filed Nico away, an actual name now, a direction, a quality. He would know him when they met. The sky had gone deep blue, the first stars appearing, Hedwig landing on the fence post and rotating her head to observe the man beside Harry with the profound regal suspicion of someone who had decided a person was acceptable but was maintaining evaluation. I need to learn the shadow travel, Harry said. You already can, Hades said. You've been doing a version of it all year. The instinct is already there. He looked at the shadow at the base of the fence, deep and clean in the evening light. Step into it. Harry looked at the shadow. He looked at it the way he looked at everything he needed to understand, with open, direct attention, not with expectation or performance. He reached for the cool silver dark in his chest, which was always there, always had been, and let it extend into the shadow the way he'd pressed his palm against the bench at the sorting or the wall of the Gringotts lift. The shadow pressed back. It was nothing like stepping into water or stepping through a door. It was more like becoming temporarily and completely at home. Like the dark recognizing something that had always belonged in it and making space, naturally, the way a crowd makes space for someone who belongs in the front. He stepped forward into the shadow of the fence. He came out of the shadow of the garden shed, 6 feet away, facing back toward the fence. He stood there for a moment, blinking, feeling the shift settle through him. Clean was the right word. Clean and entirely natural and so much less dramatic than it probably appeared from the outside. He looked back at Hades. Hades was watching him from beside the fence with those dark gray eyes, and the expression on his face was not the not-quite smile. It was something fuller and quieter and more absolute, the expression of something that had been waiting for a long time and was no longer waiting. Well, Hades said. Yes, Harry said. They looked at each other across the evening garden. I'll come back, Hades said. It had the weight of a commitment made by something that did not make commitments lightly. As I can, the rules are less constrictive now that the claim is made. I know, Harry said. Hades turned to leave, then stopped. Harry, he said. Harry looked at him. Your mother, Hades said, would be extremely proud of you. She was proud of you before you had done anything. She was proud of the fact of you. He paused. I wanted you to know that from someone who knew her. Harry stood very still. He thought about the red-haired woman in the mirror, with the eyes that were his eyes. He thought about the expression, absolute, uncomplicated, requiring nothing from him. Thank you, Harry said. His voice was even, which cost him something, though he didn't show it. Hades nodded once and stepped into the shadow at the edge of the garden wall and was not there. The garden was ordinary again. Hedwig made a sound that was deeply offended, as though someone had left a conversation without saying goodbye to her specifically. He didn't mean to be rude, Harry told her. Hedwig ruffled every feather she had, which suggested she was not entirely convinced. Harry stood in the garden for a few more minutes, feeling the cool silver dark in his chest, fuller now, somehow, than it had been, more present. The way a word becomes more present once you've said it aloud for the first time. He looked at the shadow at the base of the shed. He stepped into it, came out in the shadow of the porch on the other side of the house, looked around at the quiet street, Privet Drive at its most Privet Drive, the sameness of it, the careful, enforced ordinariness. He stepped into the shadow of the porch, came out in the shadow of his bedroom wall, upstairs, inside. He sat down on his bed, The room was quiet. Hedwig arrived through the window about 30 seconds later, clearly having flown at maximum irritated speed, and landed on her perch and fixed him with an amber stare of profound reproach. "I know," Harry said. "I'll work on taking you with me." Hedwig made a sound that conceded the point, and settled her feathers and closed her eyes. Harry lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about second year and what it would be like to return to Hogwarts knowing what he knew now. Not better or worse than before, more complete. Like a sentence with the end of it now in view, though the sentence was far from finished. He thought about the stone, which Dumbledore had taken with great care. He thought about Voldemort, diminished and furious and absolutely not finished. He thought about the wrongness in Quirrell and what a version of that wrongness in a different vessel might look like. He thought about Hades' face when Harry had stepped out of the shadow and turned around. He thought about Nico D'Angelo, somewhere in Greece, 12 years old and having a difficult year, who Harry would know when he met him. He thought about his mother. Outside, the last of the summer evening light gave way to dark, and the dark was full of the usual things, the dead below the soil, the quality of the old, the cool silver patience of the world between. It hummed the way it always had, but it hummed differently now, more specifically, more like a name. Harry closed his eyes and let the summer dark settle around him and slept without dreaming, for the first time in months, deeply and cleanly and entirely at rest. Chapter 5. The King's Son Speaks Judgment. September arrived, and Harry arrived with it. Stepping off the Hogwarts Express onto the Hogsmeade platform with his trunk and his owl, and the particular quality of someone who had spent a summer doing something productive with themselves. He looked different, not physically, not dramatically. He was still slight and dark-haired and wearing glasses with one arm taped, but there was a settled quality to him now that hadn't been there in June, something that read in the way he moved through a crowd, the way he occupied space. Like the space agreed with his being in it. Ron noticed on the carriages. "You look different," he said. "Good different or concerning different?" Hermione asked, already taking notes mentally if not literally. "Just different," Ron said, studying him. "Like you know something." "I know several things," Harry said. "About yourself, I mean," Ron said with the directness that was one of his best qualities. "Yes," Harry said. "About that, too." The carriages moved up toward the castle. Harry looked at the Thistrals pulling them, had always been able to see them, though he hadn't known what they were until Hagrid explained during a Care of Magical Creatures lesson in June, before term ended. He could see them, Hagrid had explained, because he had seen death. Harry had thought about this and decided that was technically accurate but missed the more interesting explanation. He watched them now. They moved with the grace of things that existed between categories, not quite living in the ordinary sense, not quite otherwise. One of them turned its head and looked at Harry with its wide, white, blind-looking eyes. Harry looked back. The Thistral blinked and faced forward. "The horses like you," Luna said, from the corner of the carriage. She'd turned up at King's Cross, as though she'd always been part of their departure group. Hermione making room without being asked. Ron greeting her with the cheerful acceptance he extended to most unusual things. "Do they?" Harry said. "They're not frightened of you," Luna said, which was different. "Most things that can sense what you are, they're either frightened or they aren't. The ones that aren't tend to be closer to the other side themselves." "The Thistrals live between," Harry said. "Yes," Luna said. She smiled, small and serene. "You'll find there are more of those than you'd expect." The castle rose above them in the September dusk, lit and enormous, and Harry felt the usual shift as they passed through the gates. The warmth of the old magic, the awareness of the building, the cool silver dark in his chest resonating with the stone the way tuning forks resonate with their frequency. He pressed his hand briefly against the stone of the carriage doorframe as he climbed out. The castle said, in its deep, non-verbal way, "Welcome back." Good to be back, Harry thought and meant it. Second year had 3 things wrong with it in the first week. The first was Gilderoy Lockhart, who arrived as the new defense against the dark arts professor with enough personal publicity material to wallpaper the castle and an approach to teaching that consisted primarily of talking about Gilderoy Lockhart. He was spectacular in the specific way of people who had spent enormous effort constructing a spectacle, and the construction was very good. The hair, the smile, the precisely calibrated warmth. But Harry looked at him across the classroom on the first day and felt, with the spatial awareness that served him so well, something hollow in the center of it. Like a building that looked solid from the outside and had been quietly eaten from within. Not malicious. Just empty, where something should have been. "He's lying about the books," Harry told Hermione after the first class. Hermione looked pained. She had 4 of his books and had read them twice. "Harry, not all of it," Harry said. "But the things he says he did, the core of each story, he didn't do them." Hermione's mouth went thin. She opened her mouth and then closed it again and looked at him with the expression of someone performing a rapid reassessment. "How do you know?" she asked. "When people talk about things they've actually done, there's a specific quality to it," Harry said. "It's different from performance. He's very good at the performance, but underneath it, he thought about how to describe it. When people have genuinely done hard things, especially things with death in them, they carry it differently. He carries his stories the way you'd carry a bag you packed for someone else." Hermione stared at him. Then, "I'm going to research his accreditation." "I know you are," Harry said. The second wrong thing was harder to place at first. Harry felt it the second night of term, a new wrongness, different from last year's Quirrell Voldemort presence, younger and rower and angrier. Not parasitic, more like a wound that had been left open, seeping something that contaminated the air around it. He felt it from the direction of the Slytherin dormitories, but further below that, in the castle's older bones. He filed it, watched. The third wrong thing was Draco Malfoy, who had come back to school with a new quality to him, something tighter, more brittle, performing confidence with about 15% more effort than the previous year. Harry noticed this the way he noticed everything, without attachment, with simple clarity. Something had happened to Malfoy over the summer. Something at home, something in the family, and whatever it was had left him more wound-up and more dangerous in the specific way of people who feel precarious. Harry watched him from across the great hall and thought, that one is going to break toward something eventually, and what it breaks toward will depend on who he's standing near when it happens. He didn't know yet which direction that would go. The Chamber of Secrets opened in October. Harry knew it was open before anyone found Mrs. Norris. He felt it, that younger, rower wrongness he'd been tracking since September, shifting from its dormant seeping state to an active one, like a pipe that had been weeping, suddenly fracturing. He was at breakfast when it happened, and he put down his toast, and Ron looked at him, and Harry said, "Something just changed." "Changed how?" Ron said. "Something is moving in the castle," Harry said. "Something that was dormant." "Could be good," Ron said without much conviction. "It isn't," Harry said. They found Mrs. Norris an hour later, which was how everyone else found out. Petrification. The air of Slytherin message on the wall in paint that was technically paint and also emphatically not paint, carrying the same wrongness Harry had been tracking. He looked at the writing on the wall and the quality of the magic in it and felt 2 things simultaneously. The obvious, that something old and dark had been deliberately opened, and the less obvious, the thing underneath. The thing that had opened it was familiar. Not Voldemort. Not exactly Voldemort, but a shadow of the same intelligence, the same cold, precise contempt, younger and less complete, like a photograph of a person rather than the person themselves. A version of Tom Riddle. Harry looked at the writing on the wall and thought about what the Grey Lady had told him in first year. Something that was made by walking on the wrong side of a door that was never meant to open. He'd thought she meant the stone. She hadn't meant the stone. She'd meant this. "Harry," Hermione said beside him very quietly. "I know," Harry said. "You know what it is." "Not entirely," Harry said, "but I will." Filch was crying over Mrs. Norris with the specific grief of a man whose cat was the primary occupant of his emotional world. And the crowd of students was buzzing with the compound energy of fear and excitement that crowds generate at the sight of something awful. And Harry looked past all of it at the writing on the wall and thought about a door that had been opened in a place that was very old and very dark and smelled like cold stone and deep water. He pressed his palm flat against the wall. The wrongness writhed. It knew he was there. I know you're there too, Harry thought at it. Stay put. The writhing stopped. Not because it obeyed, it didn't operate by the logic of obedience, but because it recognized something in Harry's presence that made it pause, the way all dark things paused around him, the way the devil's snare had paused, the way Voldemort's red eyes had done. The recognition of something that occupied the same territory and occupied it more completely. Harry took his hand off the wall. Right, he said. We're going to need the polyjuice potion. Hermione stared at him. How do you know about? I don't, Harry said. What's the polyjuice potion? Hermione's expression cycled rapidly. It's a potion that transforms you into another person, temporarily. I read about it. I was going to suggest we use it to get into Slytherin and find out what Malfoy knows. Good, Harry said. We should do that. Harry, it takes a month to brew and requires restricted section ingredients, and if we're caught, when has being caught stopped you from doing research that mattered? Harry said. Hermione looked at him. The corner of her mouth moved. The bathroom on the second floor, she said. The one that's always flooded, nobody uses it. Perfect, Harry said. November deepened, and the castle worried, and Harry tracked the wrongness with the patient thoroughness of someone who understood that the thing in the walls was moving according to a plan with a specific destination. The attacks happened, Colin Creevey, then a handful of others, the pattern becoming clearer with each one. The monster was moving through the pipes. It was large, it was old, and it was being directed. Harry spent 3 evenings in the library with Hermione, not the public section, the deep stacks where the old texts were shelved, and he found it in a monograph on pre-Hogwarts magical creatures, a passage about serpentine beings of enormous age that could kill with their gaze. Basilisk, he said. Hermione read the page over his shoulder, then she sat down very carefully. The indirect sight, she said. That's why they're petrified instead of dead. They all saw it reflected or through something. She looked up. Harry, you're a Parselmouth. Yes, Harry said. He discovered this in September, second Quidditch practice, when a snake had gotten onto the pitch and he'd spoken to it without thinking and it had spoken back. Ron had gone quiet for about 6 hours, then concluded that it was fine and probably useful, which was the correct conclusion. Hermione had written 4 pages of notes. The basilisk speaks Parseltongue, Hermione said. It would, Harry said. It's a snake. He thought about this. But I don't think I'd need Parseltongue anyway, not for what I want to do. What do you want to do? Hermione asked. I want to find the chamber, Harry said, and talk to what's controlling the basilisk, the intelligence behind it, the shadow of Tom Riddle. How are you going to find? I can feel where it is, Harry said. I've been feeling it since September. It's below the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. He paused. The flooded one. Hermione's face went through several expressions. The polyjuice bathroom. Right below it, Harry said. I didn't know that at first, but it makes a certain sense, given the plumbing. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. You've been knowing where this was for 2 months. I've been learning what it is for 2 months, Harry said. There's a difference. I didn't want to go in before I understood what I was going into. And now you do. Now I do, Harry said. The Polyjuice investigation happened in December, on the last Hogsmeade weekend before holidays, and produced the information that Malfoy was not the heir of Slytherin, and didn't know who was, and was in fact mostly terrified of the whole business, terrified and performing contempt as cover, which Harry had suspected. There was something almost sympathetic about Malfoy in the Slytherin common room, saying things that came out as a sneer and had fear underneath them. Harry filed this too. The second attack happened in January, and this time it was Hermione. Harry found out in the hospital wing, McGonagall's face carrying that particular quality of controlled emotion that meant something was very wrong. He went cold, not the cool silver dark cold, the actual cold of something landing wrongly. He stood at Hermione's bed and looked at her petrified face, still and gray and not Hermione, and something happened in his chest that was not the absorbed death of a killing curse. He picked up her hand and held it. She was still in there. He could feel her, the specific quality of Hermione's presence, structured and bright and deeply alive, just locked, held behind the stasis of the basilisk's indirect gaze. Not dead. Nowhere near dead. The cool Silverdark checked and confirmed this and then retired, because there was nothing for it to do here except register that Hermione Granger was very much alive, and Harry Potter was going to do something about the situation. He found a piece of parchment in Hermione's hand, still clutched from whenever she'd been working. She'd been in the library. She'd been tracking the same thing he had and had gotten somewhere. He gently unfolded the parchment. Pipes moves through them, Parseltongue. The word at the bottom was torn, but Harry could guess it. He could also see in the margin in Hermione's precise handwriting. Use mirrors. Avoid direct contact. Note spiders fleeing toward forest since October. Why do spiders fear it specifically? Cross-reference. Natural enemies. He folded the parchment and put it in his pocket. Ron found him in the corridor outside the hospital wing. He looked at Harry's face and didn't say anything for a moment. Is she, he started. She'll be fine, Harry said. She needs the mandrake potion and she'll be completely fine. He paused. But I'm going into the chamber. Ron's jaw set. When? Tonight, Harry said. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm coming, Ron said. Ron, don't, Ron said, with a quiet firmness that Harry recognized as the tone Ron used when he'd already made a decision and was not discussing it. She's my friend too. You're my friend. I'm coming. Harry looked at him for a moment. All right, Harry said. The chamber opened under Parseltongue, which Harry spoke not with magic, but with the particular fluency of someone who had a second reason to be good at it. It was the language of certain very old things that lived on the wrong side of the door, and Harry had been hearing it in the deep, non-verbal communications of the dark for a year. The sink slid aside. The pipe was exactly the right size for someone willing to commit to the descent. They slid down in the dark and landed in a tunnel full of animal bones, and Harry pressed his hand against the tunnel wall and felt the wrongness sharp and close and waiting. It knows we're here, Harry said. Good, Ron said, which was not the response of a person who was not afraid but of a person who was afraid and was past caring. They moved through the tunnels, the wrongness getting stronger, until they reached a rockfall, genuine, a ceiling collapse, not intentional. I'll go alone from here, Harry said. Harry, it's too tight, Harry said, which was true of the gap in the rocks. Find a way to send for help. Lockhart actually don't get Lockhart. He thought for a second. Get to a fireplace and flew McGonagall, tell her exactly what's here. Ron stared at him. You're going alone into a chamber with a giant basilisk. Yes, Harry said. And a Voldemort, Ron said. A version of one, Harry said. Ron looked at him with that direct, uncalculating gaze. You're going to be all right, aren't you? It wasn't quite a question. Yes, Harry said. Ron exhaled. Right, McGonagall. Got it. He put his hand on Harry's shoulder for a moment, the brief, undemonstrative contact of someone saying something that didn't need words, and then he turned and went back. Harry turned and went forward. The Chamber of Secrets was exactly what it was, old enough that the stone had a different quality from the rest of Hogwarts, pre-Hogwarts, the stone of the original Scottish earth laid down before anyone decided to build a school on top of it. The chamber had been here first. Salazar Slytherin had found it and put his monster in it and sealed it as a legacy, but the chamber itself predated him. Harry could feel the age in the stone the way he felt all old stone, the cool Silverdark recognizing something that had been near the border between for a very long time. The serpentine columns, the long reflecting pools, the massive carved face of Slytherin at the far end, eyes closed. And at the center, sitting cross-legged on the chamber floor with the posture of someone who had been waiting for exactly this and found the waiting acceptable, was a boy. He looked about 16. Dark-haired, handsome in a specific, architectural way, the kind of face that had been carefully arranged, either by nature or habit, to project what it wanted to project. His robes were old-fashioned. His eyes were dark and extremely intelligent, and looked at Harry with the same layered assessment that Harry had felt from the red-slitted eyes in the chamber under the school a year ago. The same intelligence, younger, less complete, like a rehearsal of the later thing. In his hand was a diary. "Harry Potter," Tom Riddle said, with the satisfaction of someone meeting a person they have been looking forward to meeting for reasons that are entirely self-serving. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. Something flickered in Riddle's eyes, small surprise at the name which nobody used. "You've done your research." "A bit," Harry said. He looked around the chamber, feeling the basilisk. It was at the far end, behind the face of Slytherin, coiled and enormous and waiting. He reached out with the cool Silverdark and brushed against the basilisk's consciousness, and what he found was very old and very simple and not malicious in itself. It was a kept thing. It lived according to its nature and had been aimed at targets by the person holding the diary. "Stay," Harry said to it, not in any human language, in the deep frequency that was simply understanding. "I'll come to you in a minute," the basilisk stilled. Riddle looked up sharply. "What did you just—" "I'll get to the basilisk," Harry said. "Let's talk first." Riddle studied him. Then he rose to his feet with the deliberate grace of someone who had practiced being impressive and was very good at it. He was taller than Harry, which was not difficult given Harry's height, and he had a quality of presence, real presence, not performed, the actual weight of a genuinely formidable intelligence that Harry acknowledged without being moved by. "You're not afraid," Riddle said. He said it the way Voldemort had said it in the chamber under the school, with the same quality of encountering something that didn't fit the model. "No," Harry said. "You should be," Riddle said. "I've been getting stronger all year. Ginny Weasley has been generous." He smiled, and the smile was the most frightening thing in the chamber because it was the smile of a person who was genuinely, sincerely charming in the way of people who have never been required to use that charm on behalf of anyone but themselves. "And the basilisk can't kill me," Harry said. "You know that, or you will once you look at what I am." Riddle looked at him. Really looked, the way he must have looked at Ginny Weasley's diary entries, extracting information, running analysis, building understanding. Harry let him look. He had nothing to hide. Riddle's expression changed. Not dramatically, he had too much control for dramatic changes, but the quality of his regard shifted, the way a compass needle shifts. The certainty in his face became something slightly more careful. "Interesting," Riddle said quietly. "You see it," Harry said. "You're not purely mortal," Riddle said. He said it with clinical precision, like a scientist stating a result. "There's something else in you, something," he paused, "something that knows this place. Something that owns places like this," Harry said, "and everything in them." Riddle was very still. "My father," Harry said, "would like a word with you about your Horcruxes." The word hit Riddle like a stone hitting water. The ripple was in his eyes, immediate and controlled, and it told Harry everything he needed to know. Riddle knew about the Horcruxes, had made them, was in fact the originating mind of the project that older Voldemort had carried forward, this being the memory of the boy who had worked out the theory and begun the practice, and had ended up in a diary as a consequence of exactly that kind of magic. "How do you know that word?" Riddle said. Quiet. Very controlled, all the warmth gone now. "I have a father who manages the domain that Horcruxes violate," Harry said. "It comes up." Riddle looked at him with those dark, brilliant, enormously dangerous eyes, and Harry looked back, and the chamber was very quiet except for the sound of the reflecting pools, the deep, slow drip of water somewhere. Then Riddle smiled again. Different this time, not the charming smile, something more genuine and more frightening. "You came here to do something," Riddle said. "Not just to confront me, you came here to do something specific." "Yes," Harry said. "The basilisk won't attack you." "Number. And I can't," he checked, reaching for the magic he'd been accumulating all year through Ginny Weasley's life force, and found it. He could feel it, Harry knew, but he could also feel what happened when that magic brushed against Harry, the same thing that happened to every dark casting aimed at him. Absorbed, dissolved, gone. Riddle's face went very flat. "I can't harm you." "No," Harry said. "Then what do you want?" Riddle asked. And for the first time in the conversation, underneath the control and the intelligence and the genuine formidableness, there was something else. Something that had been there all along and was now, with the calculations stripped away, visible. He was afraid, not of Harry specifically. Of what Harry represented, the thing he had been running from since he was a boy in an orphanage who understood that he could do things no one else could do, and had decided, from that understanding, that the solution to the problem of mortality was to make himself an exception to it. He had spent his life, his considerable, brilliant, terrible life, constructing an argument against death. And here, in a chamber that smelled of deep stone and old water, stood the son of the thing he'd been arguing with. Harry sat down on the chamber floor, cross-legged, mirroring Riddle's earlier posture. Riddle stared at him. "Sit down, Tom," Harry said, the name again. Riddle's jaw worked. "I'm not Tom Riddle," Harry said. "Sit down, I want to talk to you." A long pause. Then Riddle sat slowly, with the expression of someone doing something they hadn't decided to do and couldn't account for why. "I'm not going to destroy you," Harry said. "I could. That's not a boast. This is a Horcrux, a piece of soul torn from a man who is already barely a wraith, and I have a relationship with the domain you violated to make it. I could close the door it's propping open, and you would simply stop." He paused. "But that's not what I came here to do." "Then what?" Riddle said, and the word came out less imperious than he'd intended. "I want you to understand something," Harry said. "Before you go, before whatever happens next, Ginny recovers, the diary gets dealt with, you go back to being part of Voldemort's splintered soul, I want you to understand one thing." Riddle said nothing. He was listening with the absolute attention of a person who is genuinely uncertain what comes next and has decided that information is the priority. "Death is not the enemy," Harry said. "It is not the thing that diminishes you." "What diminishes you?" He looked at Riddle's face, at the brilliant architecture of it, at the waist that was threaded through the brilliance the way wrought is threaded through wood. "What diminished you was the decision to be afraid of it. Every choice you made from that fear, every terrible thing, every Horcrux, every murder, it all comes from one original wrong turn. The decision that death was something to escape rather than something to know." Riddle looked at him with those ancient dark eyes in that young face. "You can't know death," Riddle said. "You can't know it and remain yourself. Nothing comes back from it the same." "No," Harry said. "Things don't come back from it the same. They come back changed." He thought about the dead below the lake, the fishermen still and restful, the ghosts of Hogwarts in their room on the 4th floor, old Mr. Fig's husband, telling him to water the hydrangeas. Changed isn't the same as diminished. You decided they were the same and you were wrong, and everything that came after that was built on the wrong foundation. The chamber was very quiet. Riddle looked at Harry with an expression that was doing several things at once, the intelligence processing, the fear holding, and underneath both of those, something that Harry had not expected, something young and old at the same time, something that had been sealed in a diary at age 16 and had never quite, something that looked, very briefly, in the space between one breath and the next, like a person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just for a single moment set it down. "It doesn't matter," Riddle said, and his voice was almost back to the controlled quality it had started with. "This is a fragment, a memory. Whatever I understand here doesn't transfer." "I know," Harry said, "but you'll remember. Whatever Voldemort is, he's still connected to the fragments of himself. And maybe one day," he paused, "maybe one day what you understand tonight is the thing that creates the one moment of clarity that changes something." He looked at Riddle steadily. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because it's right to say the thing that's true even when you don't know what someone will do with it." Riddle stared at him. "Your father," Riddle said, and his voice was very careful, "is Hades." "Yes," Harry said, "and he knows about the Horcruxes." "He does now," Harry said. "Souls that have been torn and bound by blood magic don't go where they're supposed to. They're stuck. My father is very particular about his domain being orderly." He paused. "He is working on it." Something moved through Riddle's face, something complicated. "You're telling me," Riddle said slowly, "that the Horcruxes will be dealt with regardless." "Regardless of anything else, yes," Harry said. "It might take time. He has a lot of patience, but yes." The silence stretched. Then something happened to the diary in Riddle's hands. The pages went still and the ink, the animated, conscious quality of it, the riddle in the pages, went quiet, the way a fire goes quiet when it runs out of fuel. Not extinguished, but settled. Something that had been fighting its own dissolution, leaning into it instead. Tom Riddle looked at the diary in his hands. He looked at Harry. "Potter," he said, and his voice had lost most of its architecture. "Yes," Harry said. "I don't think I was always going to be this," Riddle said. It was not an apology, and it was not self-pity, and it was not an absolution. It was the statement of a fact, offered by something that had been brilliant and frightened, and had made a series of wrong turns starting from a single wrong premise, offered to the one person in the room capable of understanding the full weight of what it meant. "I know," Harry said. Riddle's presence in the diary faded, not with drama, not with screaming, quietly, in the way that things fade when they are finally, genuinely done. The diary was empty paper. Harry sat with it for a moment. Then he stood up, put the diary in his bag, and went to find the basilisk. The basilisk was exactly as large as he'd imagined, which was very large indeed, a serpent of a scale that made the chamber's considerable dimensions feel modest. It was coiled behind the face of Slytherin in the dark, enormous and old and genuinely ancient in a way that very few living things were, and when Harry stepped around the face, it turned toward him and opened its eyes. Harry met its gaze directly. Nothing happened. The basilisk's killing gaze hit the cool Silverdark and dissolved, the same as everything else always had, and Harry looked into the great pale eyes and saw what was there. A creature that was incredibly old and had been imprisoned here since before anyone currently alive had been born, and was tired, and was ready. He spoke to it in the language that was not Parseltongue and not any human language, the deep frequency, the non-verbal, the language of the thing between. "You've been here a long time." The basilisk moved, a vast, slow coiling, settling into a different posture. Something that acknowledged the observation. "You don't have to stay any more," Harry said. "The person who was directing you is gone." A long stillness. The basilisk's tongue tasted the air. "Where," it said, in the deep non-verbal way, "do things like me go?" Harry thought about this honestly. He thought about the enormous, patient thing below the school, the domain that was his inheritance, the community of the dead that was not diminished but changed. "Somewhere that knows what to do with something as old as you," Harry said. "I promise." The basilisk looked at him for a long moment with those enormous, deadly, ancient eyes. Then it laid its head down on the chamber floor, and was still. Harry stood in the Chamber of Secrets and felt the door open briefly, gently, and the basilisk's enormous old soul move through it with the dignity of something that had been ready for a long time and was grateful for the permission. The door closed. The chamber was quiet. He heard the door at the chamber's entrance open and footsteps, and Ron's voice saying bloody hell at the chamber's dimensions, and then beside Ron another voice, younger, rougher, with an edge to it that was specifically adolescent and specifically furious, saying, "It's already done. Are you kidding me? I shadow-traveled into a castle for this." Harry turned. Ron was standing at the chamber entrance, face pale with the residue of a genuinely difficult night, looking between Harry and the enormous dead basilisk with an expression of someone updating their ledger on what constituted a lot. Beside Ron was a boy. He was 12, maybe 13, with dark hair and dark eyes, and the jaw and the brow that Harry now knew as the signature of their shared inheritance. He was shorter than Harry, which he was clearly deeply unimpressed by, and he was wearing clothes that were dirty from travel, and he had the specific bristling, defensive energy of someone who had arrived, prepared for a fight, and was annoyed that the fight was over. He had a sword, actually had a sword in his hand, Stygian iron by the look of it, black and cold gleaming, and exactly the kind of thing you'd bring to a chamber of secrets if you were 12, and the son of the lord of the underworld. He looked at Harry with those dark eyes. Harry looked back. The recognition was immediate and bilateral. Harry had felt this was coming since Hades had said Nico D'Angelo. He finds his way to things. And Nico, by the expression on his face, had felt it too and was annoyed about the vulnerability of it. "You're Harry," Nico said, with the tone of someone confirming an inconvenient fact. "You're Nico," Harry said. "Your basilisk is dead," Nico said. "I know. I was here when it happened." "I could have helped with the basilisk," Nico said. "Probably," Harry said. "But it didn't want to fight. It wanted to go home." Nico looked at the basilisk. At Harry, back at the basilisk. His jaw was tight in the way of someone processing something that had moved them and refusing to show it. "Dad sent you?" Harry asked. "Dad told me about you," Nico said, with the specific energy of someone who had been thinking about a half-sibling for several months and had prepared to be competitive and was now, against his better judgment, recalibrating. "I came on my own." "How did you get through the wards?" "Shadow travel," Nico said. "Same way you'd do it." Harry considered this. Then, "Are you hurt?" Nico blinked. It was the question he hadn't been expecting. "No," he said, and the bristling quality dropped a fraction. "You?" "No," Harry said. Ron, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of a person trying to process 3 extraordinary things at once, said, "Should someone explain what just happened? The full version, I mean, not the bit where Harry goes in alone and comes back out and the giant snake is dead." "I'll explain everything," Harry said. "But we need to get Ginny Weasley out of here first." He looked around the chamber. At the far end, near the wall, Ginny was unconscious on the floor, pale, cold, but alive. Harry had felt her the moment he entered, her life force weak but present, and it had steadied as Riddle faded. He crossed the chamber and crouched beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. Alive. Warming. "She'll be all right," he said. Nico crouched on the other side of her and looked at Harry across her still body. His dark eyes were sharp and evaluating and not entirely hostile, which was, Harry suspected, about as far as 12-year-old Nico D'Angelo went in terms of warmth toward new people. "You talked to him," Nico said, "not a question. The Riddle thing, you could have just destroyed it." "Yes," Harry said. "Why didn't you?" Harry thought about how to answer this. He thought about what Hades had said, the dead are not subjects to be commanded. They are a community to be known, and about the book's description of the domain as responsibility. He thought about Riddle's face in that last moment, the brilliant, frightened boy under all the terrible architecture. "Because saying the true thing to someone matters," Harry said, "even when you don't know what they'll do with it. Maybe especially then." Nico looked at him for a long moment. "That's annoying," Nico said. "What is?" "That you're right," Nico said. Harry almost smiled. "You'll get used to it." "I won't," Nico said, with the conviction of someone who had decided to maintain a position regardless. Ron said from across the chamber, "I like him." Nico looked at Ron. "Who are you?" "Ron Weasley. She's my sister," Ron said, indicating Ginny, and some of the defensiveness went out of Nico's posture. "She'll be fine," Nico said, with the authority of someone whose relationship to the boundary between fine and not fine was very specific. "She's nowhere near the edge." "How can you?" Ron started. "Same way Harry can," Nico said, with the slightly belligerent tone of someone not in the habit of explaining themselves. Ron nodded. "Right, makes sense." He paused. "Are you staying?" "At Hogwarts." Nico looked at Harry. Harry looked back, waiting, not pushing. "I don't go to school here," Nico said. "I know," Harry said. "You don't have to." "I'm not going to just," Nico made a gesture that conveyed attach myself to your group without using those words. "Obviously," Harry said. "I have my own things," Nico said. "I know that too," Harry said, a pause. "But I might," Nico said very carefully, "come back periodically if something's happening." "You're welcome," Harry said, "whenever." Nico looked at the chamber ceiling, at the dead basilisk, at Harry. He was fighting something, visibly, the 12-year-old version of the thing every person fights when someone they've been prepared to resist turns out to be nothing like the resistance they'd prepared for. "Your hair," Nico said finally, landing on the thing that was bothering him least, "is ridiculous." "I know," Harry said. "It's like looking at myself," Nico said, "if I'd been hit by something." "Our father has strong genes," Harry said. Nico made a sound that was almost, very briefly, a laugh. Then he got to his feet and sheathed his sword and said, in a tone that brooked no discussion, "I'll carry her." He picked Ginny up with the matter-of-fact practicality of someone who had been doing things that needed doing for longer than most 12-year-olds and nodded toward the chamber entrance and walked. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. "He's good," Ron said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. "Are there more of them, more siblings?" "A few," Harry said. "I've only met this one." "Lot to take in," Ron said, in the tone of someone who had been saying this with increasing frequency since September of last year and had found a kind of peace in the recurring experience. "Always," Harry agreed and picked up his bag with the empty diary in it and followed Nico out of the chamber. Above them, the school waited. Beyond it, Scotland. Beyond that, a world that was running on a set of assumptions about Harry Potter, about what he was and what he feared and what could be used against him, that were wrong in ways it hadn't begun to understand yet. And beyond that, diminished and furious and absolutely not finished. A wraith that had spent a year trying to reclaim a body and had instead spent an evening in a chamber having someone explain, patiently and directly, where it had gone wrong. Harry climbed out of the pipe and stood in moaning Myrtle's bathroom with chambered dust on his knees and looked in the mirror above the sink at himself. He looked, he thought, exactly like what he was. He looked like someone at the beginning. The cool silver dark hummed in his chest, warm and deep and patient, the inheritance of a domain that was larger than any single year and more complex than any single story, pressing forward into whatever came next with the absolute, geological confidence of something that had all the time there was. He straightened his glasses, walked out of the bathroom. The corridor was lit by torchlight, warm and ordinary, and somewhere outside the castle walls the September sky was turning, the first gray light of a dawn that didn't know yet what it was going to have to reckon with. Harry Potter, son of Lily Evans, son of Hades, Gryffindor, Seeker, boy who the killing curse forgot, walked toward it.